Hello everyone, I'm Justin, and this is a full recap of the Marvel Cinematic Universe Phase 4. If you end up enjoying this video and want to see more from us, then make sure to click that subscribe button and click the bell to know anytime we upload a new video. With the MCU's 5th phase now 4 projects in, and Phase 4 completely out of the way, we think it's time we take a look back at the entirety of Phase 4, which, although not having as much of an overarching narrative across each project as the previous 3 phases, still featured plenty of enjoyable projects amongst its 18 installments, made up of 7 movies, 8 shows, 2 specials, and 1 series of shorts. Before continuing on with our recap though, you should first go check out our previous MCU Phase recaps, as we've covered the entire Infinity Saga, which is linked down below. But if you've already gone through that, then it's time we move on to the Multiverse Saga. Phase 4 opens with a 1950s-style opening credits for a sitcom about Wanda Maximoff and Vision called WandaVision, which follows the two lovers as they try to keep their superhuman abilities hidden from the rest of Westview, New Jersey, and live a nice suburban life. The 1950s style of this pilot, though, continues to evolve in the second episode, with it beginning in a more 1960s style before transitioning by the end into the style of sitcoms from the 1970s. And with this transition in styles also comes a transition in the lives of our two protagonists, as Wanda suddenly realizes she's pregnant. This proves not to be a normal pregnancy though, as their doctor, Dr. Nielsen, reveals that she's already in the second trimester. And this pace continues on until eventually, a few hours later, she goes into labor. So Vision rushes out to find Nielsen, while Wanda's soon met at their home by their neighbor Geraldine, there to spread some gossip from work, but she instead ends up having to help Wanda give birth to what turns out to be twins, whom she and Vision decide to name Billy and Tommy. Following their birth, Vision heads outside and encounters a couple of their other neighbors, Herb and Agnes, who express their concerns with Geraldine's recent arrival in town, as they've noticed she has no sort of family, or even a home. But they suddenly refuse to expand on this any further and gleefully exit. Meanwhile, inside, Wanda reveals to Geraldine that, just like her sons, she also had a twin brother named Pietro, who Geraldine recalls was killed by Ultron, confusing Wanda, who then notices a familiar sword symbol on her necklace that leads her to promptly send Geraldine flying out of some sort of energy field around the town of Westview, outside of which she's quickly found by officers of the Sentient Weapon Observation and Response Division, aka SWORD, which we learn was founded by Maria Rambeau, the former best friend of Carol Danvers, aka Captain Marvel. And we also learn that Geraldine is actually her daughter, Monica. Prior to ending up trapped in Westview, Monica had just recently returned to life after being snapped out of existence by Thanos. And unfortunately, during the time she was gone, her mother had passed following her battle with cancer. So, upon returning to her position at SWORD, Monica now found herself working under director Tyler Hayward, who, for her first job back, had her join Jimmy Woo of the FBI to investigate the Westview anomaly. But after getting too close to it, she became trapped inside, leading SWORD to call in a few experts to help them better understand the situation, including Dr. Darcy Lewis, the best friend and former assistant of Jane Foster. And there she quickly discovered a colossal amount of cosmic microwave background radiation coming from the anomaly, which she then was able to connect to an old-fashioned TV to view the events of WandaVision. That's existence really confuses them, as well as the fact that Vision appears to have been resurrected. Eventually, they find themselves all caught up on everything up to Tommy and Billy's birth, although the broadcast skips past Geraldine's banishment. But they soon learn the truth behind all of this upon finding her, as she reveals it's all Wanda's doing. So now with Monica's side of the events that took place, Hayward conducts a briefing, during which he showcases footage from 9 days ago that makes it appear that Wanda had broken into SWORD headquarters and stolen Vision's body, hence why we see him now resurrected. Meanwhile, inside the Hex, Vision has begun to feel there's something off about this place, and his suspicions are soon raised even higher while at work, as he discovers an email on his coworker's computer from Darcy discussing the Maximoff anomaly. So he confronts Wanda about everything he's noticed, and questions why he can't remember anything about his life before Westview. But their conversation is soon interrupted by a knock at the door, behind of which is revealed to be Wanda's brother Pietro, now without his accent and with a different face. Following his return, WandaVision transforms into a 90s-style sitcom, with this episode being its Halloween special, in which Wanda and Pietro head out trick-or-treating with Billy and Tommy, who previously had aged themselves up from babies to 10-year-olds, and who we see share the powers of their mother and uncle, with Tommy capable of running at superhuman speeds, and Billy sharing his mother's telepathic powers and ability to manipulate psychic energy. Throughout the night, Wanda tries to understand why Pietro's here and why he looks so different, but she doesn't really find an answer to either of those questions, and instead just grows more and more frustrated with him. Vision, meanwhile, although he had told Wanda he'd be taking part in patrolling the neighborhood as part of the Neighborhood Watch, has actually headed out to investigate Westview in search of the truth, eventually making it to just outside of the Hex's border, which he attempts to pass through, but finds himself unable to, as it begins tearing him apart. Throughout all this going on within the Hex, Hayward prepares to take action against Wanda, which Monica continued to try and prevent, as she believed that if Wanda's the problem, then she has to be the solution. But her attempts resulted in Hayward ordering for her, Jimmy, and Darcy to be taken off base, forcing them to continue their research for a better solution undercover, with Darcy eventually managing to hack into the data on Hayward's devices, while Monica contacted an associate that would help her re-enter the Hex, which Darcy attempted to advise her against doing, since the barrier had already begun rewriting her cells twice. But Monica still plans on going through with it anyway. She and Jimmy then headed off to meet with her associate, while Darcy stayed behind to continue breaking through Hayward's encrypted data. Although this was soon interrupted, as Vision began making his way out of and being slowly torn apart by the anomaly, which Billy is able to sense with the use of his telepathic abilities, so he rushes over to his mom. And she ultimately saves Vision by expanding the size of the Hex, trapping most of Hayward's men as well as Darcy inside of it. With it feeling like everything she's built is falling apart, Wanda decides to take a self-staycation for the day, and has her sons head over to Agnes's house so she can be alone. But her alone time is soon interrupted by a returning Monica, who we see now possesses superhuman abilities. Prior to this, Monica had attempted to break through the Hex's barrier in a heavily armored space rover, built for her by some of her mother's old colleagues, but the attempt was ultimately unsuccessful, so Monica instead tried passing through it herself as she did earlier, and once again her cells were rewritten. But fortunately, she survived the exposure and actually gained superpowers from it. She doesn't try using them on Wanda though, and rather attempts to relate to her, as she understands what it's like to lose the person most important to her. But their discussion is quickly interrupted by Agnes, who takes Wanda with her back to her house. Upon entering though, Wanda's sons are nowhere to be found, so she enters the basement in search of them and is promptly locked inside what appears to be a lair, before Agnes reveals herself to actually be Agatha Harkness, an undercover witch. Back in 1693, Agatha, a member of the Salem Coven, was captured and bound to a wooden post after they learned of her secretly practicing dark magic, forcing them to try and kill her with energy beams. But she was able to reverse the beam's effect back onto and kill them, before then continuing her studies of this dark magic with the use of the Darkhold, also known as the Book of the Damned, which corrupted her mind and gave her nearly unparalleled power. But over 300 years later, she began sensing the magical energy coming from Westview, and discovered power even greater than her own, being wielded by Wanda. So she entered her warped reality to try and learn how she did it, even sending the fake Pietro, who was actually just a man from Westview named Ralph Boner, to try and get it out of her. But since that idea failed, she now, after rendering Wanda defenseless with a protection spell that in a given space allows only the witch that casts the runes to use their magic, looks to get it out of her herself by forcing her to relive events from her past that led to her shattered mental state, including the night her parents died, the experiment that gave her her powers, and one particular conversation with Vision following her brother's death, where their love for one another began. And these memories finally get her to remember how this all started. After the Avengers' victory against Thanos, Wanda, wanting to have a funeral for Vision, tracked his body to SWORD headquarters, where it was revealed that they were actually taking it apart, which Hayward claimed was their legal and ethical obligation, as he was the most sophisticated sentient weapon ever made. And despite Wanda's pleas, he refused to allow her to just bury him, and she was forced to say her goodbyes at the facility. Following this, she then drove out to a property in Westview that had been purchased by Vision prior to his death, with the intention of building a house on it for them to grow old in. And with the realization that she and Vision wouldn't be able to live out this dream life together, she unleashed chaos magic for the first time and created the Hex over the town of Westview, as well as recreated her lost lover, Vision. With this revelation, Agatha realizes that Wanda doesn't actually understand the incredible amount of power she possesses, so she looks to take it for herself, goading her into sending energy blasts at her so she can begin absorbing some of it, until Wanda soon takes her out momentarily. This is then followed by the arrival of Vision, although not the one Wanda had recreated, but a rebuilt version put together by Hayward using some of the Hex's energy. And this white Vision then attempts to crush Wanda's skull, but fortunately she's saved by her recreated Vision, who throughout this had encountered and broken Darcy free of Wanda's control so she could reveal the truth behind everything, as well as his past in the real world. And so, upon encountering this alternate version of himself, he, after a short brawl, manages to gain the intrigue of the White Vision, as he discusses their very existence and what makes one of them the true Vision. And they eventually conclude that their past memories and experiences are what make them who they are. So Wanda's recreated Vision helps uncover the data being kept from the White Vision and restores his memory, leading him to exit the Hex. Wanda, meanwhile, continues to be sought by Agatha for her power, as she believes Wanda is the fabled Scarlet Witch, whom an entire chapter of the Darkhold is dedicated to, and whose destiny is to destroy the world. But Wanda refuses to believe she's a witch, so to prove she's not the hero she thinks she is, Agatha releases the citizens of Westview from Wanda's spell, and forces her to see the torture she's put them through, prompting Wanda to begin taking down the Hex's barrier so they can be freed. But she ultimately can't bring herself to completely tear it down, since it will result in her dream family ceasing to exist. In the brief moment the Hex was open though, Hayward and other SWORD agents were able to enter the town, but their attempt to attack the Maximovs is quickly and easily thwarted by Billy and Tommy. So Hayward goes to execute them himself, but he also fails to do so thanks to Monica, leading him to re-enter his vehicle, which is then subsequently rammed into by Darcy in a food truck, leaving him trapped to later be arrested. Wanda, meanwhile, has continued to try and fight off Agatha, but she's unable to launch any attack without her absorbing it. So she seemingly decides to give up and allows Agatha to absorb the remainder of her magic. But this turns out to have been a ploy, as Wanda, while firing her magic at Agatha, had also in the process managed to cast the same protection spell Agatha used earlier, casting runes on each wall of the Hex. And this allows her to absorb all of Agatha's magic and fully transform herself into the Scarlet Witch, before then transforming Agatha into Agnes and leaving her to live out her life in Westview as punishment for what she'd done. Wanda then finally puts an end to this fantasy life she created once and for all, following a final kiss goodnight to her sons and another tearful goodbye to Vision. And as a result of taking an entire town hostage, Wanda's forced to go into hiding. That doesn't stop her from trying to better understand this power she now holds though, and she begins to study it within the Darkhold, and it looks like she plans on using it to potentially bring her family back to life. Meanwhile, back in Westview, Monica's met by what turns out to be an undercover Skrull, who claims she was sent by a friend of her mother and that they would like to meet with her. Moving on to another Avenger snapped away by Thanos 5 years ago, as we meet back up with the Falcon, Sam Wilson, who's currently seen working with the US Air Force to rescue a hostage captured by the criminal organization LAF, led by Georges Batroc. And Sam ultimately manages to save the hostage while Batroc manages to escape. Following this mission, he's joined by his friend and US airman Joaquin Torres, who informs him of a new anarchist group called the Flag Smashers, made up of people who'd survived the blip and believed the world was better before everyone returned. And Sam asks Torres to keep looking into them while he heads over to Washington, D.C. for a press conference at the Smithsonian Institution, during which he announces his decision to turn over the Captain America shield gifted to him by Steve Rogers and have it added to his exhibit at the museum, as he feels it doesn't belong to anyone else. Sam then returns to his hometown of Delacroix, Louisiana to visit his sister Sarah and her two sons Cass and AJ on their old family boat, Paul and Marlene, named after their parents. While we see Torres, since his discussion with Sam earlier, has now managed to track down the Flag Smashers in Switzerland, just as they unleash their next attack. So he goes to arrest one of them, but is instead easily knocked out by what turns out to be a super soldier. He'd managed to record the attack against him though, and sends it straight to Sam upon regaining consciousness, who prepares to go on the offensive against the group himself. But before he can do that, his attention is drawn to the news, as it's announced that the US government has chosen a new Captain America, highly decorated Captain of the US Army, John Walker. This decision appears to frustrate Sam, and we see it's also heavily aggravated Steve Rogers' best friend, Bucky Barnes, who we learn earlier had been pardoned by the US government for his past crimes as the Winter Soldier, and has since been trying and struggling to return to a normal life after decades of living through constant war, with him attending court-mandated therapy with Dr. Christina Rayner, who's urged him to try and make amends with those he affected as the Winter Soldier, including a man named Yori Nakajima, whose son had witnessed Bucky kill a target of Hydra during his time under their control, so Bucky was forced to kill him as well. And ever since his son's death, Yori's constantly wondered what really happened that night. Bucky's still not ready to face what he'd done and tell Yori the truth though, and has now shifted his focus onto Sam, who he tracks down to express his displeasure with his decision to turn over the shield. But Sam claims he has other important things to deal with right now, specifically the fact that there's another batch of super soldiers on the loose. So Bucky decides to join him in tracking the Flag Smashers down, and they soon find them as they're exiting a warehouse in Germany. Upon breaking into one of their trucks though, the two find themselves quickly overpowered, and are only able to momentarily gain control in the fight when they're joined by John Walker and his partner Lamar Hoskins, aka Battlestar, until the four are ultimately sent flying off the trucks. Following their defeat, Walker and Hoskins attempt to convince Sam and Bucky to join forces with them, as they're currently working to keep things stable on behalf of the Global Repatriation Council, an international council that manages resources for those displaced by the blip. But Sam feels they're better off working as free agents on this one. Having just gotten whooped by super soldiers and still frustrated with Sam's decision, Bucky then takes him to Baltimore, Maryland to meet a man named Isaiah Bradley, who Bucky reveals is also a super soldier and one that Hydra feared most, just like Steve, with him even having encountered and nearly killed the Winter Soldier back in 1951. There wasn't much to look back on fondly during Isaiah's time as a soldier though, and he claims that, in return for being a hero, they threw him in jail for 30 years, where they continued to experiment on him. Sam tries to better understand what happened, but Isaiah refuses to talk about it any longer and orders them to get out of his house. Although that conversation didn't go as Bucky had hoped, it did make him begin thinking about Hydra once again, who he now believes may have something to do with the resurgence of super soldiers. So he suggests they meet with the man who knows all of Hydra's secrets, Baron Helmut Zemo, who's currently still locked up on the raft, and Sam reluctantly agrees. So they travel to the raft, and Bucky, without consulting Sam about it first, breaks Zemo out of prison so he can take them wherever they need to go. And Sam, although completely perplexed by Bucky's decision, agrees to move forward along with them. So the two travel in Zemo's private jet, since it turns out his family was royalty before his home was destroyed during the heroes' battle against Ultron, and travel to the Brass Monkey Saloon nightclub in Madripoor to meet with the high-ranking criminal who runs it named Selby, who Zemo offers the Winter Soldier in exchange for what she knows about the Super Soldier Serum, which gets her to reveal that Dr. Wilfred Nagel had originally created it for the Power Broker, another criminal even higher than Selby in the pecking order. But she refuses to give up any more information until Zemo adds more to his end of the bargain. Before he can do that though, Sam receives a phone call from his sister, which blows their cover and forces them into a fight with Selby's henchmen, during which she's suddenly shot through the window and killed, resulting in a bounty being placed on their heads and forcing them on the run. Fortunately though, they're quickly found by former S.H.I.E.L.D. agent Sharon Carter, who kills those pursuing them and reveals that, ever since she was made an enemy of the state for aiding them and Steve during the Avengers Civil War 7 years ago, she's been off the grid here in Madripoor, living as a hustler, and she's visibly quite frustrated with them, specifically Zemo, but still offers to let them stay at her place for now. And there, Sam offers to get her name cleared once they return to the States, and also asks for her help in finding Dr. Nagel, to which she agrees, quickly tracking his location and taking the three to interrogate him. They get Nigel to reveal that he first began his work as part of Hydra's Winter Soldier program, and then when Hydra fell, he was recruited by the CIA, who had blood samples of an American test subject, Isaiah Bradley, with semi-stable traces of serum in his system, that he was then able to use to create a new and more efficient serum. But before he could complete his work, he was snapped out of existence for 5 years, and when he came back, the program had been abandoned. So he instead completed his work with the funding of the Power Broker, enabling him to make 20 vials of the serum, all of which were then stolen by Karli Morgenthau, the Flag Smashers' leader. Upon learning there was no more serum left outside of the batch Karli stole, Zemo suddenly shoots Nigel dead, and before they can react to that, his lab is blown up by bounty hunters. The explosion fortunately doesn't result in any injuries though, and they're eventually able to escape after Zemo kills a majority of their attackers. So they begin making their way out of Madripoor, while Sharon chooses to stay behind until Sam makes good on his promise. Once on Zemo's jet, Sam receives new information on Karli from Torres, who he'd asked following their discussion with Nigel to look into a woman named Danya Madani, as Nigel had mentioned how Karli had came to him hoping he could help cure the woman's tuberculosis, but he refused. And it turns out Danya had just recently died in a GRC resettlement camp in Riga, Latvia, which we saw earlier as Karli knelt beside her. Karli, along with the other Flag Smashers, had seen Danya as a sort of mother figure ever since she took them in when they were left orphaned by Thanos' snap. and continued looking after them when they, as well as her, were put on the street following half of the world's return, as that half ended up being given more resources than those that hadn't been snapped away, an injustice which led to the Flag Smashers' creation, who we now see raiding a GRC supply depot in Lithuania after having tied up everyone inside, before Carly then set the place to blow, shocking her fellow Flag Smashers. But she claims it's the only way their message will be heard. Meanwhile, Zemo, Sam, and Bucky have made it to Zemo's apartment in Riga, but as the former two enter, Bucky splits from the group for a moment, as he's noticed they're being followed by soldiers from Wakanda, one of whom named Io, who we learn had played a pivotal part in freeing him from Hydra's brainwashing, confronts him and questions why he'd released Zemo. But after he explains why they need him, she gives him 8 more hours before they come to take him back. He, Sam, and Zemo then head over to the GRC resettlement camp where Danya had passed, and there Zemo learns where and when her funeral will be held. So Sam plans to meet Carly there alone and try to reason with her, but things are soon made complicated by the arrival of Walker and Hoskins, who'd learned of their alliance with Zemo, although they decide against apprehending any of them for now, and instead join them as they go ahead with their plan, with Sam meeting with Carly shortly following the memorial and attempting to get her to see that, although she's fighting for a good cause, the way she's going about it is wrong, and makes her just as bad as the people she's fighting against. Before he can get her to see reason though, Walker comes storming in, unwilling to allow her an opportunity to get away again. But his arrival ultimately results in just that, as she knocks him and Sam to the ground before running off down to the building's basement, where she's promptly met and shot at by Zemo, who manages to land a shot to her stomach, causing her to drop the super soldier serum vials in her possession, that he then promptly destroys as she escapes the building. He's then suddenly knocked out by Walker, who discovers one last vial left, so he puts it in his pocket just as the remaining heroes enter the room. Having failed to capture Carly, they then return to Zemo's apartment to regroup, and there they're met by Wakanda's Dora Milaje, seeking to take Zemo back to prison. Things quickly escalate though, after some patronizing from Walker that results in Io and her fellow soldiers attacking him and Hoskins, which forces Sam and Bucky to step in and results in the former getting whacked in the head for his efforts, while Bucky has his vibranium arm removed by Io, before their fighting ultimately ends after the Dora Milaje realize Zemo had managed to escape the building, so they leave to search for him. Back in Louisiana though, Sam's sister Sarah receives a call from Carly, who gives her coordinates for her to give to Sam so the two can meet alone, and threatens to harm her and her sons if he declines to do so. So Sam, along with Bucky, suits up and goes to the desired location. But he quickly learns, with the help of Sharon, who he'd asked to keep an eye on Walker earlier, worried he'd move in on Carly alone, that this meeting was just to separate him from John. So, after a short scuffle, Sam flies off to help him, as he and Hoskins have found themselves surrounded by the other Flag Smashers, who quickly manage to capture and tie up the latter. It soon appears they may have bitten off more than they can chew though, as Walker, thanks to him having taken the super soldier serum he'd collected earlier, easily manages to overpower one of them, which Sam arrives just in time to witness. Bucky and Carly also soon arrive during Sam and Walker's brawl with the remaining Flag Smashers, and Carly immediately looks to attack Walker, but is thwarted by Hoskins, who'd managed to break free of his zip ties, so she responds with a huge strike to his chest that sends him flying into a pillar and ultimately unintentionally kills him. This puts a stop to their brawl and prompts the Flag Smashers to run off as Walker continues chasing after them, and he eventually manages to take one named Nico down and repeatedly impale him with Captain America's shield, killing him in broad daylight as civilians look on. Following this shocking turn of events, Walker runs off to be alone for a moment, but he's quickly found by Sam and Bucky, who ask him to stand down and turn over the shield, prompting him to instead unleash an attack against them, which he manages to maintain control throughout the majority of, with him even tearing the wings off of Sam's jetpack. But he's ultimately defeated after the two manage to break his arm and hit a huge tag team move to knock him out. He's then transported back to the US the next day and brought before a council of government officials to be discharged from the army and stripped of his military rank, as well as his status as the new Captain America. But although he's no longer directly working for the US government, he's soon given a new job opportunity by Valentina Allegra de Fontaine, who's learned that he's now a super soldier and claims it's made him a very valuable asset, so she says she'll be calling him and urges him to pick up the phone when she does. Sam and Bucky, meanwhile, with no leads as to where Carly's gone, are forced to put their mission on hold. So Bucky goes to track down Zemo and soon finds him at the Sokovian Memorial made to honor those lost back in 2015. Zemo doesn't plan on running though, and ultimately allows himself to be handed over to the Dora Milaje, who look to return him to his cell on the raft. And now, having dealt with Zemo, Bucky asks one more favor of them, although we don't learn what it is just yet, and for now, we meet back up with Sam as he arrives in Baltimore to meet with Isaiah Bradley once again, and learn what went wrong during his time as a soldier. So, Isaiah explains that he wasn't the only one to receive the serum, and that he and a few others would be sent away on missions without a care of whether or not they died, as was the case with one particular mission where a few of them got captured, and those running the operation prepared to blow up the POW camp they were trapped in to get rid of the evidence. Bradley, though, couldn't just let his brothers die, so he escaped the facility and brought them back himself, which later resulted in him being thrown in prison until he was eventually able to escape thanks to a nurse who took pity on him and had him declared dead. Sam believes they need to tell people about him so they can recognize him for the hero he is. But Isaiah doesn't believe anything is different about the world today than how it was back then, and claims they'll never let a black man be Captain America. Following their discussion, Sam returns home to Louisiana and there is met by Bucky, who apologizes for not understanding what it would feel like for a black man to hold the shield, and explains he only reacted the way he did because that shield was the closest thing he had left to family. So it being gone made him question everything about himself, Sam, and Steve. In response, Sam tells him that he needs to stop looking to other people to tell him who he is, and that in order to get out of this hell his mind is trapped in, he needs to actually give those he wronged the closure they've been seeking, rather than just stopping all the wrongdoers he enabled as the Winter Soldier and calling it making amends. So, with those words of advice, Bucky heads home and awaits their next mission, while Sam begins training to use the Captain America shield in combat. Throughout all this, the Flag Smashers have planned out another huge attack, this time with the help of Georges Batroc, who's joined their fight so he can kill Sam Wilson, and together they look to prevent the GRC vote on the Patch Act, which intends to forcibly relocate people displaced by the blip back to their home countries. And Sam soon learns of their plans from Torres, who spotted them in New York where the vote is taking place. So Sam suits up in his new Captain America suit gifted to him by Bucky and made by the Wakandans, and heads over to the building in which the voting is taking place as the Flag Smashers cause it to go into lockdown. Sam also has Bucky meet him there, and once there, Bucky's then met by Sharon as well, who's returned to the States to offer her help. So, while Cap comes crashing in and takes a Flag Smasher within the building out before having to battle Batroc, Bucky and Sharon look after the government officials, who quickly end up captured after being lured into NYPD vans that the Flag Smashers take control of. Bucky's able to track them down before they can drive off though, so they instead light the van on fire, which forces Bucky to shift his attention to it. But again, before they can escape, they're met by John Walker, who arrives wielding a self-made Captain America shield, looking to avenge his best friend and kill Carly, who, after taking out the other Flag Smashers, he gets the chance to fight one-on-one. At least that is until she runs into one of the NYPD vans containing the government officials and begins driving it off a cliff, hoping it would distract him. Although hesitant at first, John ultimately chooses to save the civilians rather than continuing his pursuit of her, which then allows the Flag Smashers to attack him from behind, resulting in Walker as well as themselves falling off the cliff. So Sam swoops in to save the civilians instead, and with them safe, Cap, Bucky, and Walker prepare to battle the Flag Smashers together. But that's unfortunately thwarted by Batroc, who fires off smoke bombs so they can head underground, where Carly's soon found by Sharon, who's revealed to actually be the power broker, as she attempts to persuade Carly and the remaining Flag Smashers to return to working alongside her. But Carly refuses. So Sharon calls in Batroc, who she'd actually hired to spy on Carly and who enters with his gun aimed towards her. But now that he knows the power broker's secret identity, he demands she give him 4 times her original asking price for the job, to which Sharon declines before just shooting him, which in turn allows Carly to shoot her in the stomach. She then goes to finish the job but is interrupted by Sam, who she unleashes an attack on in response, but he refuses to fight back, even when she aims her gun at him, making her hesitant to shoot him and allowing Sharon to shoot her twice and kill her. The other Flag Smashers, meanwhile, are found by Walker and Bucky, who have them arrested before Sam arrives, carrying Carly's body down onto a stretcher, and he's promptly met and thanked by members of the GRC Council, who still express desires to follow through with the Patch Act, prompting a speech from Sam in which he forces them to question why someone was willing to die trying to stop them, and proclaims they've got to step up because if they don't, the next Carly will. The remaining Flag Smashers are then placed into an NYPD van to be transported to prison, but just as the vehicle begins driving off, it suddenly explodes thanks to Zemo and his butler, Osnick. The following day, we see John Walker once again being met by Valentina, who who gives him a new black version of his suit and explains that soon they'll need to call him in for his services. Bucky, meanwhile, having taken down the Flag Smashers, finally takes Sam's advice from earlier and gives Mr. Nakajima the closure he'd been seeking, revealing the truth behind his son's death in hopes that it would bring him some semblance of peace. We then see Sam as he once again meets with Isaiah, during which we learn that the GRC will not be moving forward with the Patch Act, before Sam then takes Isaiah to the Smithsonian to reveal he's been given his own exhibit and will finally be celebrated as a hero. Things aren't necessarily all great though, as we see Sharon, after being pardoned thanks to Sam, may have plans of gaining even more power as the power broker now that she has an in with the US government. Jumping back in time a bit now, and actually into another universe, as we return to 2012 following the Battle of New York during the Avengers time heist, when Loki's 2012 variant gained possession of and used the Tesseract to escape their custody. We see now though that the Tesseract had transported him to the Gobi Desert in Mongolia, where he's soon met by supposed agents of the Time Variance Authority, there to arrest him for his crimes against the sacred timeline. Once transported back to their headquarters, Hunter B-15 has the Tesseract put into evidence, and Loki's shown a video starring Miss Minutes, which explains that long ago there was a vast multiversal war that nearly resulted in the total destruction of everything, until the all-knowing Timekeepers emerged and reorganized the multiverse into one sacred timeline. But sometimes variants veer off the path the Timekeepers created for them, creating a Nexus event, which left unchecked could potentially lead to another multiversal war. So to prevent that, the Timekeepers created the TVA and its workers to set time back on its predetermined path, which leaves the variants that veered off said path without a place on the timeline, so they must stand trial for their offenses. And Loki's then taken before Judge Ravonna Renslayer to do just that, but he pleads not guilty and claims the Avengers are the actual time criminals, since it was their actions that allowed him to escape. But it turns out, as revealed by Renslayer, that the Avengers time heist was supposed to happen, and it was his escape that created the Nexus event. So he attempts to escape once again with the use of his powers, but they're revealed not to work in the TVA, and he's sentenced to be reset. That is until Renslayer is approached by another TVA agent, Mobius M. Mobius, who's been searching for a dangerous variant that's been attacking and killing hunters as they attend to Nexus events and stealing their reset charges. And he believes Loki may have some knowledge that could help find them, so he convinces her to allow them to speak in private in hopes of learning why Loki does what he does. But Loki refuses to believe anything about this place, so Mobius begins showing him his intended future, revealing that if Loki hadn't picked up the Tesseract, he would have been imprisoned on Asgard, before the Dark Elves would later attack the palace, and he'd attempt to lead them to Thor, but instead would end up sending them to his mother, who'd be killed as a result. Before they can continue though, Mobius is called away, as the dangerous variants killed another unit. So he goes to wrap things up, only to find Loki has escaped, as he's gone to track down the Tesseract, threatening an employee named Casey into turning it over to him. But when he finds it, it's placed alongside multiple other Infinity Stones, which appear powerless here. So he returns to Mobius's office and views the remainder of his set path, including his father's death, his reconciliation with his brother, and ultimately his death at the hands of Thanos. And all this makes him realize that he has no other options, so he agrees to help Mobius and gives him some insight on why he does such horrible things, claiming that, although he doesn't enjoy it, he's had to kill people in order to inspire fear and reach his perceived destiny. He still doesn't understand how this helps with their current situation though, until Mobius reveals that the dangerous variant is actually another variant of Loki. So, hoping his unique Loki perspective will lead them to this other Loki, Mobius has him take a look through each of the variants' case files, and through this, Loki realizes that they must be hiding in apocalypses, as their presence there wouldn't form a branch on the sacred timeline, since the location will be destroyed anyway. So they begin searching through case files for all naturally occurring disasters that go down without warning and leave no survivors, and they eventually decide on traveling to the 2050 apocalyptic event in Haven Hills, Alabama, along with a unit of hunters once again led by Hunter B-15. Once there, Loki and Mobius are split up, with Mobius searching throughout the supermarket with the other hunters, while Loki searches for the variant with B-15. And as they search, Mobius finds the previously captured Hunter C-20, who appears traumatized and reveals that she gave up the Timekeeper's disclosed location to the variant. Meanwhile, Loki soon encounters said variant, who communicates with him through various civilians within the store, including Hunter B-15, by enchanting and transferring their consciousness into them, which our Loki is unable to do. In their discussion, Loki attempts to recruit them to overtake the Timekeepers together, but the variant doesn't want to rule the TVA, and instead plans on destroying it, which they begin their attempt at after revealing themselves to be a female Loki variant who chooses to go by Sylvie, and exiting through a portal to the TVA's headquarters, as the reset charges she'd stolen earlier are sent through their own portals throughout the store to bomb the sacred timeline. She's continued to be pursued by Loki though, as he's still hoping they could partner up, distracting her and allowing a unit of hunters and Renslayer to surround them, so they're forced to retreat through another portal and unintentionally send themselves to an apocalyptic event that Sylvie describes as the worst of them, on the moon Lamentis 1 in 2077, and they're unable to leave yet, as the tempad used to create the portals is low on battery. Loki quickly gains possession of the device though, and uses his illusions to hide it, forcing her to work alongside him for now, so they make their way to the evacuation vessel, the Ark, which they believe would have enough power to charge it, and get on board with the use of their combined magical abilities. Once on board, they begin growing more of a liking towards one another, as they discuss some of the negative and positive parts of their lives growing up, as well as their equal struggles with finding love. But they're soon interrupted by the ship's guards, who realize they aren't actually permitted to be there, resulting in a brawl that ends with Loki being launched out the window. So Sylvie dives after him in the tempad, which gets completely destroyed as he tumbles to the ground, forcing them to devise a new plan in which they'll have to hijack the Ark and make sure it actually makes it off the moon. As they make their way back to it, Loki asks to know how her enchantment powers work, and she explains that upon making physical contact, she's able to grab hold of their mind. Although some minds are stronger than others, so for those, she has to create a fantasy from their memories, which is what she's revealed to have done to C-20, using a memory from her time on Earth before she was even working for the TVA. And this revelation shocks Loki, as he was under the impression that the Timekeepers created all their workers. Still, they continued forward towards the Ark as the moon and another planet continue to collide, but by the time they reach it, all they're able to witness is its destruction. With their death imminent, Sylvie reveals what led her to want to destroy the TVA, explaining how a unit of hunters, which was actually led by Renslayer, took her when she was just a child and held her prisoner, until she managed to gain possession of a tempad and escape, but was still forced to grow up at the ends of 1,000 worlds. So Loki comforts her, praising how she was nearly able to take down what's likely the most powerful force in the universe, and letting her know that she's amazing. Their demise continues to grow nearer though, so the two lock eyes and hands, accepting their fate. But just then, two portals appear beside them from the TVA, as for some reason their actions have created a branch on the timeline. So they're both taken back to and separately imprisoned at their headquarters, with Loki being questioned by Mobius about the branch he and Sylvie had created. Loki doesn't actually know what caused it, but Mobius soon figures it out, as after lying about Sylvie being pruned and seeing the sadness the news brought to Loki's eyes, he realizes that it was the result of two variants of the same being sharing romantic feelings for one another. Loki quickly shifts off that topic though, to reveal that the Timekeepers are lying to them, and that all of the TVA's workers are variants. But Mobius refuses to believe him and exits. He's left thinking about what Loki said for a bit though, especially since earlier he was informed by Ravonna that C-20 had died due to Sylvie's enchantment of her. So he goes to speak with her again to learn more about what happened, but she constantly deflects the question, forcing him to steal her tempad while she isn't looking, through which he learns that C-20's mind didn't crumble as Ravonna claimed, but rather she was killed to prevent anyone else from learning the truth. So Mobius rushes back to find Loki, to whom he reveals was right all along, and prepares to work together to save Sylvie, as he believes that the connection between them could be able to take the TVA down. Before they can though, they're met by Ravonna and a unit of hunters, who she orders to prune Mobius before escorting Loki out of his cell. They then go to escort Sylvie out of hers as well, but when they enter, they find her soaking wet, as earlier she was met in her cell by Hunter B-15, who then took her back to the 2050 apocalyptic event to learn what the memories she was shown while enchanted earlier were, and has it proven to her that she, as well as everyone else, are indeed variants. So Ravonna has an alert put out for her, while Loki and Sylvie are taken before the Timekeepers to be pruned. But just then B-15 arrives and shuts down the necklaces trapping them, before the three engage in a battle against Ravonna and the Hunters, each of whom are promptly killed, while Ravonna is incapacitated. And with no one left to guard them, Sylvie begins her attack on the Timekeepers, first decapitating one of them before the other two seemingly shut down, as it's revealed that they aren't actually living beings, but just mindless androids. And before they can try to figure out what to do next, Loki's suddenly pruned by a recovered Renslayer, although she fails in her attempt to prune Sylvie as well. So, to avoid being killed, she reveals that Loki isn't yet dead, but was rather transported to the void at the end of time, and offers to help her find him, as well as whoever actually made the TVA. But just when she appears to be trustworthy, she has her guards called in by Miss Minutes, so Sylvie steals her tempad and prunes herself to enter the void, where we see Loki has met up with multiple other variants of himself, who've helped him avoid the Void's guardian, the trans-temporal entity Alioth. One of the Lokis, later labeled Kid Loki, is actually the chosen ruler of the Void, with his Nexus event having been him killing Thor, while another of them, dubbed Classic Loki, had everything go as intended all his life, until he managed to trick Thanos and fake his own death with an incredible illusion. He wasn't immediately caught by the TVA though, as he decided to stay away from his loved ones upon realizing that all he brought was pain and suffering. So he lived for years on a remote planet in isolation, until he eventually started to miss his brother, but as he prepared to reunite with him, the TVA arrived. They believe there's no hope for their redemption, since even when they try to change for the better, the TVA sends them here. But Loki convinces them that could change if they help him take down Alioth, as well as the TVA, and they agree. They're soon aided in their quest as well by Sylvie and Mobius, who'd met up earlier upon awakening in the Void, and Sylvie proposes she enchant Alioth, believing it must be guarding whoever's behind all of this. So Classic and Kid Loki bring them to it before heading back into hiding, while Mobius uses the tempad to return to the TVA, and Loki and Sylvie approach Alioth as it branches out towards them. Once close enough, Loki begins distracting the entity, while Sylvie attempts to enchant it, but it soon realizes what they're doing and turns its attention to her, until it's shifted towards a greater distraction, that being a huge illusion of Asgard conjured by Classic Loki, who seems to have finally found his glorious purpose as he sacrifices himself to allow Sylvie, together with Loki, to enchant the entity and make it to the Citadel at the end of time. Meanwhile, back at the TVA, Renslayer's called for Miss Minutes to download all the files on the founding of the TVA, as she does actually want to find the real person behind it, but she's instead given files that Miss Minutes claims He Who Remains deemed more useful. Upon receiving these files though, she's met by a returning Mobius, so she tries to call in a hunter, but they're currently occupied with Hunter B-15, who was imprisoned after their brawl earlier, before now being released by Mobius, and traveling to Fremont, Ohio in 2018, where she reveals the truth to the hunters by introducing them to Ravona's variant self. Mobius doesn't want to prune her though, and actually believes that together they could rebuild the TVA while still protecting people's free will. But she believes the only person that can have free will is the one in charge, so she exits through a portal to search for it herself. Back to Loki and Sylvie now though, as inside the Citadel they finally meet He Who Remains, a variant of scientist Nathaniel Richards, who explains that eons ago, a variant of himself lived on Earth in the 31st century, and became the first to come in contact with alternate universes and his own variants. But although there was peace at first, eventually some of his variants looked to conquer other universes, resulting in a multiversal war. And from all the tears in reality came Alioth, which he managed to weaponize to put an end to the war, before then creating the TVA as well as the Sacred Timeline, to prevent any branches in reality that would result in his variants rising again.
If you think I'm evil, just wait till you meet my variants.
It turns out though, that for a long time he's been looking for someone to take his place, having grown tired and older, so he proposes that they take over, as he believes out of every scenario he's seen play out, that they're the best choice. Before they can give him an answer though, he goes silent for a moment, before revealing that, although he claimed to know everything to ever happen, from this moment forward, he actually doesn't know what'll happen next. Sylvie doesn't buy it though, and goes to kill him, but she's stopped in her attempt by Loki, who does believe him, and thinks they should consider taking his place if it means staving off something worse, which results in a short battle between the two, as she believes he's just seeking another throne. But Loki manages to pause her attack, as he explains that all he really cares about is making sure she's okay, leading the two to share a kiss, before she then shoves him through a portal back to the TVA, and ultimately stabs He Who Remains through the heart, who claims he'll be seeing her soon as new branches begin to form in the timeline behind him. Meanwhile, back at the TVA, Loki rushes to the library in search of Mobius, but when he finds him, Mobius has no idea who he is, and we see that he's actually somehow ended up in the past, as in place of the Timekeeper's statues is a statue of Kang the Conqueror. Shifting our focus back to the main Marvel universe now, as we're brought back to 1995 Ohio, where we see a young Natasha Romanoff and what appears to be her family, made up of her younger sister Yelena Belova and their parents Alexei Shustakov and Melina Vostokov, all of whom are forced to rush out the house and onto a plane for reasons Alexei and Melina choose to not yet explain. But we soon learn why once they and the kids land in Cuba and are met by a high-ranking officer in the Soviet Armed Forces, Dreykov, who it turns out Alexei, a super soldier, and Melina, a Black Widow, had been working undercover for to infiltrate and destroy a SHIELD facility while posing as an American family. And now, with their mission complete, their surrogate daughters are sent to the Red Room and trained to become Black Widow assassins. We're then taken forward in time around 21 years later to 2016, during Natasha's time on the run from the US government for violating the Sokovia Accords, as she reunites with her old friend Rick Mason, who'd set her up with a place to stay and multiple fake identities, as well as retrieved some mail and personals from her old safe house in Budapest, which she just leaves in her car. While driving that night though, she's suddenly attacked by Taskmaster, a superpowered being with the ability to mimic the fighting techniques of other individuals. After a continued assault on Natasha, Taskmaster then shifts their attention to a case within Nat's mail from Budapest. But before they can collect whatever's inside, Nat's able to covertly retrieve it for herself just before being kicked off the bridge and into the ocean. And once out of the attacker's sight, she takes a better look at the case's contents and realizes it was sent by Yelena. So Natasha travels to her safe house in Budapest, where she finds Yelena waiting for her. And after the two engage in a short brawl, Yelena explains that the particles she sent are an antidote to mind control, which she was hoping Natasha would have brought to her friends in the Avengers so they can take down the Red Room. But since they have just recently broken up, that's no longer an option. Natasha's shocked to learn that the Red Room's still active though, since she was under the belief that it shut down when she killed Dreykov. But before she can make sense of any of this, the two are attacked by other Black Widows, which they're able to escape from, and once having found a secure hiding spot, Natasha reveals what happened the day she supposedly killed Dreykov, whose assassination was the final step in her defection to SHIELD, explaining that she and Clint Barton had rigged bombs at Dreykov's home. But in order to ensure he was in the building when they blew it up, Natasha used his daughter, Antonia, to lead her to him, resulting in her death as well as her father's, or so she thought, since it appears now that Dreykov somehow managed to survive. So she and Yelena prepare to actually take him down this time. But first they need to figure out where the Red Room's located, and they believe their surrogate father could help them with that. Alexei Shustakov, who we see now is locked up in a Russian prison, used to actually be the Soviet Union's counterpart to Captain America, the Red Guardian, during the Cold War after being the sole recipient of the recreated super soldier serum. But with the dissolution of the Soviet Union in December 1991, he found himself no longer operating in combat, and was instead made General Dreykov's right-hand man. That is until sometime following his previously mentioned undercover mission, he and Dreykov had a falling out, resulting in him being incarcerated. So, in order to get what they need from him, Nat and Yelena have to break him out of prison, which they ultimately manage to do, but he claims not to know where the Red Room is, and suggests they track down their mother, since she and Dreykov still have a working relationship, and they agree. So, Alexei leads them to Melina's home, but she doesn't help them get much further in their mission either, and she and Alexei just try acting like this is a fun family reunion, which Natasha takes exception to, claiming it was never real. But this statement hurts Yelena, since they were the only real family she ever knew, and she storms into the other room. So Alexei decides to follow after her, and even helps cheer her up a bit by singing a song she used to love as a little girl. But their moments soon interrupted by the arrival of an aircraft sent from the Red Room, since Melina had informed Dreykov of their whereabouts not too long after they showed up at her farm. And the Red Room's agents quickly take out Red Guardian, while Melina takes out Natasha and Yelena. Once transported to the Red Room, which we see is actually located in the skies over Russia, Melina meets with Dreykov, although he quickly deduces that she's actually Natasha wearing a photostatic veil. As earlier, after Yelena and Alexei left the table, Melina decided that she wanted to make up for the torture she'd put them and many other young women through. So, although she'd already called the Red Room, she came up with a plan that would allow her to break Yelena and Alexei out of the Red Room's custody, before bringing the Red Room and Dreykov to the authorities, while Natasha would be brought before Dreykov himself. He takes this opportunity though to thank Nat for giving him his greatest weapon, revealing that Taskmaster is actually his daughter Antonia, who he then sends away to take out the others, and this appears at first to be a dumb decision, since now there's no one to stop Natasha from killing him. But she soon learns that he's made himself immune to any attack with a pheromonal lock, So, with her unable to harm him, he reveals his plans to finally come out of the shadows, now with an Avenger under his control, and unleash his widows planted all across the world to take it over, which he claims he could do with just a push of a button. But once he reveals the device from which he controls the Red Room and his Black Widows, Natasha suddenly breaks her own olfactory nerve, which removes his pheromonal lock and allows her to knock him to the ground. Before she can shut down his database though, she's met by more Black Widows, whom he orders to kill her while he exits the aircraft, which has begun uncontrollably crashing thanks to Melina, who was forced to make a change of plans after Dreykov shut down their original one. And although Nat puts up a good fight, the numbers advantage eventually becomes too much. But before they can kill her, Yelena arrives and releases the antidote to remove the Red Room's control over them, allowing Natasha to then download the database onto a portable drive before attempting to make her escape. But on her way out, she comes across Antonia trapped in a cell, which she was locked in by Melina and Alexei earlier after they managed to thwart her attack. And Natasha decides to not leave her behind and frees her from it, even while knowing that she'll still continue to try and kill her. Yelena, meanwhile, has also managed to escape the aerial platform and now climbs atop Dreykov's ship to destroy one of its engines, which results in an explosion that kills him and several of his soldiers, but also sends Yelena plummeting towards the ground. Fortunately though, Natasha is able to catch and attach a parachute to her, before then engaging in another brawl with Taskmaster, in the midst of which she's able to remove her mask and eventually free her of the Red Room's control as well, with a vial of the antidote. Nat then reunites with Yelena, Alexei, and Melina, all of whom are finally able to make amends, but they're subsequently forced to exit as Thaddeus Ross and US agents arrive. So Yelena, Melina, and Alexei leave with Antonia and the previously freed Black Widows, while Natasha leaves separately, hoping to patch things up within the Avengers. With that, we're then brought back to the present, where we see Yelena at Natasha's grave, soon to be joined by Valentina Allegra de Fontaine, who appears to have some sort of working relationship with her, and who's received a new job for Yelena, which she states is to kill the person responsible for her sister's death, Clint Barton. Returning to the multiverse again now, as we're introduced to the Watcher, one of many all-knowing beings that observe the multiverse from the nexus of all realities, and who abide by an oath that prohibits them from interfering with the events occurring within the realities they observe. This Watcher, though, is soon faced with a threat so great that he considers violating that oath. But before we can get to that, we're first walked through multiple stories throughout the multiverse, the first of which beginning during World War II, moments before Steve Rogers was injected with the super soldier serum in the experiment that transformed him into Captain America, during which, in our main Marvel universe, Peggy and the other onlookers were asked to watch from afar in a booth. But in this universe, Peggy decides to stay by Steve's side, so the others watch from below alongside her. And this allows the undercover Hydra assassin, Heinz Kruger, to create an explosion before Steve's injected, rather than after, which kills Erskine, before then shooting and killing Colonel Chester Phillips as well, prompting Steve to exit the chamber in an attempt to stop him, but he's shot in the abdomen and paralyzed from the waist down for his efforts. Fortunately though, Peggy is able to gun down Kruger just before he can escape with the serum, and she then, with their window to complete the experiment closing, has Howard Stark run it on her. But although it successfully transforms her into a super soldier, the new head of the SSR, Colonel John Flynn, refuses to allow her to fight on the front lines, believing women aren't meant to be soldiers. She quickly gains the opportunity to prove him wrong though, after she and Stark discover that Hydra had gained possession of the Tesseract, which Flynn isn't too worried about, believing it's nothing more than a glorified battery. But Stark knows it's capable of being much more than that, so he fits Carter with a suit and vibranium shield to track down the gem, which she soon does, as well as capture Hydra scientist Dr. Arnim Zola. And with the newly acquired Tesseract, Stark's able to build and power an iron suit that allows Steve to join the fight as the Hydra Stomper alongside Peggy, now becoming known as Captain Carter. And together, the two successfully disrupt multiple Hydra operations. Tragedy does soon strike though, during an attack on a train they believe to be carrying Hydra's leader, Johann Schmidt, aka the Red Skull. But upon entering it, Steve walks right into a trap and is presumably killed by an explosion. Broken up by the loss and fueled by revenge, Peggy gathers her unit, which includes Steve's best friend Bucky, and heads off to the final Hydra stronghold to put an end to Schmidt and his army. And once there, they find a still alive but captured Steve, while the Tesseract is shown to now be in the possession of Schmidt, who's begun using it to create a wormhole from which a creature that he's named the Champion of Hydra emerges, although he's unable to control it and is promptly killed as the beast continues to grow larger and larger. Peggy's fortunately soon joined in fighting it off though by Steve, who's managed to momentarily power his suit with a generator, and as they battle, Stark begins shutting the wormhole down. But in order to shove the beast back through it, Peggy realizes she must sacrifice herself, and so she does, despite Steve's attempts to stop her, which are thwarted when his suit's power runs out. Captain Carter suffers a similar fate to our universe's Captain America following her sacrifice though, as upon eventually exiting the wormhole, she ends up 70 years in the future. We're then taken through another story within the multiverse, following a variant T'Challa, who in his universe has actually become known across the galaxy as the legendary Ravager Star-Lord. To understand how this happened, we're taken back to 1988 as a young T'Challa expressed his desire to see the world outside of Wakanda to his father, King T'Chaka, but was assured that all he'd find was destruction and pain. Still, T'Challa escaped through Wakanda's border that night, but was promptly abducted by Ravagers Kraglin and Taserface, who'd been ordered by Yondu to capture a young Peter Quill, but got confused by Wakanda's cosmic readings and took him instead, frustrating Yondu at first, but he quickly took a liking to T'Challa and his desires to travel the world, so Yondu took him to instead travel the galaxy. Sometime later, he apparently looked to return T'Challa back to Wakanda, but he claimed by the time they arrived, Wakanda had been destroyed. So T'Challa continued to journey as a Ravager, and over time shifted their focus from just stealing for money to stealing to help the galaxy's less fortunate. This change in the Ravager's way of life would also lead to changes in the course of history, as in this universe, T'Challa was able to put a stop to Thanos' plans of decimating half of all life, and instead recruited him onto their unit, which in turn resulted in his adopted daughter Nebula not being as heavily scarred by the torture he would have put her through, as we see when she later meets with T'Challa to point him in the direction of the Embers of Genesis, nutrient-rich cosmic dust from an ancient supernova that with just an ounce could heal a dying planet in minutes. In order to steal the Embers though, they'll have to take on the Collector, Tanalir Tavan, who's taken over as the intergalactic underworld's most ruthless kingpin and leader of the Black Order. So they form a plan to avoid him, with Nebula and Yondu arriving to sell him the recently acquired Power Stone, while sneaking T'Challa in so he can search throughout his collection for the Embers. T'Challa doesn't end up finding them though, and instead stumbles upon a Wakandan ship, inside of which a holographic message from his father reveals that Wakanda hadn't actually been destroyed, and that they're still searching for him. But before he can act on this, he's suddenly captured by Tavan and Nebula, the latter repaying a previously owed debt, and he's then locked up alongside his fellow Ravagers and Yondu, who he promptly calls out for lying to him about his home, but Yondu claims he was just trying to help him live out his dreams. Their confrontation's then interrupted as T'Challa's taken before the Collector, who's excited to now add Star-Lord to his collection. But those plans are soon thwarted when T'Challa breaks out of his cell with the use of his vibranium necklace and begins a battle with Tavan, while the Ravagers are broken out of their cell by Nebula, who reveals that this was all a part of her and T'Challa's plan to allow her to collect the Embers while he kept Tavan distracted. But this plan doesn't look to be working out too well on T'Challa's end, as Tavan's gained the upper hand in their battle with the use of various weapons collected throughout the galaxy. But T'Challa's fortunately saved by Yondu, who helps trap Tavan in his own cell before releasing his prisoners to attack him as they escape in the Wakandan ship found earlier. And after making amends with Yondu, T'Challa decides to take his found family home with him to Wakanda. Next, we're taken through a story during Fury's big week back in 2010, beginning the morning following Tony's meltdown at his own birthday party, as he's met by Nick Fury and Natasha Romanoff, who subsequently inject him with lithium dioxide to help negate the poisonous effects of the palladium powering his arc reactor. But in this universe, the injection suddenly kills him, forcing Fury to have Natasha arrested by Strike. He suspects someone else was behind the murder though, so he covertly hands her the antidote she'd injected Stark with so she can look into it without S.H.I.E.L.D.'s knowledge, and she goes to do just that after breaking out of their custody while Fury's called away by Coulson, who had just found Thor's hammer Mjolnir. Shortly after Fury's arrival though, Thor arrives as well and begins taking out their men on his way to steal back the weapon. So Fury and Coulson have Clint Barton watch from above, just as he did in our main universe. But this time, despite orders to hold his fire, an arrow shot through Thor's heart, killing him. Clint claims he didn't shoot though, but before they can discover what really happened, Clint's found dead in his cell, And Fury begins connecting the dots with all these murders, as Tony, Thor, and Clint were all on S.H.I.E.L.D.'s radar for the Avengers initiative. So he calls up Natasha and warns her that she, as well as Dr. Bruce Banner, are likely the killer's next targets. Natasha, throughout all this, had tracked down Dr. Betty Ross so she could help look into the antidote, and the two discovered that it was actually a projectile that shot out of the syringe and not the antidote itself that killed Tony. Before Natasha then found Bruce Banner hiding within the lab as an attack team in search of him led by Thaddeus Ross arrived outside, resulting in Banner, after being shot in the shoulder, transforming into and rampaging as the Hulk. Although not for long, as he suddenly begins uncontrollably growing before ultimately imploding. Meanwhile, back at the base surrounding Mjolnir, Fury's soon met by Asgard's army and Thor's adopted brother Loki, seeking vengeance for his brother's murder, and he attacks Earth with the Casket of Ancient Winters until Fury manages to talk him down and convince him to give them more time to find his brother's actual killer. And soon, Fury gains his biggest clue yet on the killer's identity, although at the cost of Natasha's life, who had finally discovered who they were after hacking into S.H.I.E.L.D.'s Avengers Initiative files moments before they appeared behind, attacked, and killed her. Fortunately though, just before she was killed, she managed to send a message to Fury in which she warned it's all about hope. And Fury soon realizes what this message means, so he heads over to the grave of Hope Van Dyne, who's revealed to be a former agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. that died while on a mission. And there, Fury's met by her father, Hank Pym, who's been in constant mental torment since her death, leading him to begin his own mission of taking down S.H.I.E.L.D., hence why he's attacked their team of superheroes. And he now looks to take Fury's life as well, but Hank proves to be no match for him, as Fury's revealed to actually be an illusion conjured by Loki, who Fury had approached and convinced to work alongside him, and who easily defeats Hank. Although it appears his business on Earth is concluded, Loki decides he wants to extend his stay, and has himself named ruler of the planet. So, to combat this, Fury begins building a new team of Avengers, starting with the recently uncovered Captain America, as well as Captain Marvel. Onto another alternate reality now, this time focusing on Dr. Stephen Strange, who, in our main universe, went on to become a master of the mystic arts following a car accident that severely injured his hands. But in this universe, it isn't his hands that he loses, but rather his heart, as this time alongside him in his vehicle during the accident is Christine Palmer, who takes the brunt of the impact and dies as a result. Her death, though, pushes him to search the world for answers, and he eventually ends up in Kamar-Taj, resulting in the same events unfolding as our main universe, up to him defeating Dormammu and the Zealots. But this time, after coming out victorious, he finds himself unable to let go of the past or Christine, leading him to try and prevent her death with the Time Stone. No matter how many times he tries though, he's unable to reverse it, and his constant attempts eventually draw the attention of the Ancient One, who explains that the death of Christine Palmer is an absolute point in time, making it unmovable and unchangeable, as her death is where it starts for him to become Earth's protector against any mystical threats. Strange refuses to believe it's impossible though, and thinks he only requires more power. So, despite the Ancient One's warning that this path will only lead to darkness, Strange uses the Eye of Agamotto to transport himself back in time to the location of the lost books of Cagliostro, just as the Ancient One blasts him with beams. And there, he's met by Obang, the book's keeper, who allows Strange to begin studying them, and within the books, he discovers that he can gain the power to break an absolute point through the absorption of other beings, which is exactly what he does for the next several years, resulting in him gaining various new abilities. Once he's reached a sufficient amount of power, Strange prepares to travel through time once again and goes to say goodbye to Obang, now much older and on his deathbed, and who tries to explain to Strange that death is part of the plan. But he still refuses to accept that, a response Obang had expected, so he expresses hope that maybe the other Strange can, since as it turns out, there are actually two Doctor Stranges in this universe, the other of which we see is still seated in the Sanctum and has chosen against using the Eye of Agamotto to bring Christine back. Following this decision though, he's met outside the Sanctum by a psychic impression sent through a splinter in reality from the Ancient One, who reveals that earlier, when she blasted Strange, she had actually drawn power from the Dark Dimension to split the timeline, since she was unable to follow after him as he searched for the lost books. creating 2 Doctor Stranges in one reality in hopes that this Strange would be able to stop his alternate from reversing an absolute point and destroying reality. Upon encountering this other version of himself though, things quickly lean in Strange Supreme's favor, and eventually, he's able to overtake the other Strange's soul. So with the 2 Stranges merged, Strange Supreme is finally able to bring Christine back to life. But this unfortunately results in exactly what the Ancient One had warned him about, as the reality begins to completely come apart, forcing Strange, in an attempt to stop this, to call out to the Watcher. But he refuses to violate his oath, and Strange Supreme is forced to watch as his universe and Christine cease to exist, leaving him trapped alone inside a pocket dimension. Moving on to another story focusing on the end of the world now, beginning when Bruce Banner comes crashing through the ceiling of the Sanctum following Thanos' attack of Asgard's ship. But upon returning to Earth, Bruce quickly learns that it's been overrun by zombies, as he's attacked by zombified versions of Iron Man, Doctor Strange, and Wong. Fortunately though, he's saved just in time by the Wasp, Hope Van Dyne, whose family actually plays a part in how this all started. After finally making it into the quantum realm to reunite with Janet Van Dyne, Hank Pym was promptly attacked and zombified by his deceased wife, who had contracted a quantum virus that corrupted her brain. And the 2 zombies then returned home through the quantum tunnel and quickly began infecting people across the planet, including multiple Avengers. A few heroes have still managed to avoid the virus though, including the Wasp, the Winter Soldier, Happy Hogan, Kurt Gorster, Sharon Carter, Okoye, and Spider-Man, who, now along with Bruce, have begun a journey to Camp Lehigh in New Jersey, hoping it'll have the equipment to fabricate a cure. Their journey is soon interrupted though by zombie variants of Hawkeye and Falcon, who promptly zombify Happy as well, but the group's able to put them down and hop on a train, where they're then joined by a zombie Captain America, who quickly infects Sharon before being killed by Bucky, who's forced to slice his best friend in half with his own shield, while Sharon's subsequently killed by Hope. Although, in doing so, she ends up infected as well, due to some of Sharon's zombie guts getting into a previously opened wound. Things then get even worse after this, as their train suddenly runs out of fuel. So Hope, aware that her time's run out, enlarges and allows herself to be attacked by a crowd of zombies as she drops the remaining heroes off at Camp Lehigh, where they're then met by the still alive Vision, who's been able to keep the zombies at bay with the Mind Stone embedded in his forehead, as it emits a subfrequency that's not to their liking. And upon recognizing this, he'd begun running experiments to see if the stone was the key to a cure, and they appear to have been successful, as he was able to save Scott Lang, who had been bitten by Hank and Janet following their return from the quantum realm earlier, although he's now left as just a head with no body. With this revelation, the heroes prepare to travel to Wakanda, the last human sanctuary on Earth. But those plans are soon interrupted after Bucky stumbles upon a still alive T'Challa, whose leg had been amputated so it could be fed to the zombified Wanda, who Vision reveals he'd attempted to cure, but her powers resisted the treatment, so he instead chose to contain her and her hunger, as he was unable to bring himself to kill her. He does understand that what he's done is wrong though, and he now chooses to make things right as she breaks out of her cell and begins attacking the heroes, with her killing Kurt and Okoye. So he helps them escape the building before destroying it, trapping Wanda beneath the rubble. Although he still can't bring himself to leave her, so he instead removes the Mind Stone from his body and allows himself to die beside her, so the heroes can take it with them. But before they can fly off in a quad jet, Wanda emerges from the rubble, so Bucky stays behind to buy them some time along with Bruce, who's finally able to transform into the Hulk once again. And this allows Peter, T'Challa, and Scott to begin their journey to Wakanda and hopefully create a cure. But it looks like, in order to do that, they'll have to take down a zombified Thanos, who by this point had collected the remaining 5 Infinity Stones. Let's jump back to 2008 now, as we follow Tony Stark just as his transport convoy is attacked by the 10 Rings. But this time, before one of his own company's weaponry could leave him severely wounded, he's saved by Navy SEAL Eric Stevens, aka Killmonger, who takes down the remainder of the 10 Ring soldiers before helping return Tony back home. Upon his return, Tony holds a press conference to appoint Eric as his company's new chief security officer. And during said conference, Eric reveals why he was in Afghanistan, as he'd been in the midst of a deep cover operation inside the Ten Rings when he'd uncovered plans to assassinate Tony Stark, ordered by Stark's partner, Obadiah Stane, who's then arrested after Stevens uploads evidence of his involvement online, prompting Tony, with Stane's position now open, to make Eric Stark Industries' new COO as a thank you. After a night of celebrating, the two end up discussing Eric's doctoral thesis from his time at MIT for an automated combat drone, which he'd hoped could replace human soldiers, but never had the technology to do it, at least until now, as Tony offers to help him build his project. They quickly run into some trouble though, as they struggle to find a sustainable power source, so Killmonger suggests they use vibranium, and Tony believes he knows just the guy that could acquire some, that being Ulysses Klaue. But in order to make the deal, they'll need to keep it hidden with a diplomatic cover, so they decide to send in Rhodey and a few other US soldiers. The deal goes south quick though, following the arrival of the Black Panther, Prince T'Challa, who takes down Rhodey's men as well as Klaue, and urges Rhodes to let him take the vibranium back where it belongs. But their discussion is immediately interrupted by the arrival of Killmonger, wielding a portable Stark sonic cannon, which he uses to kill T'Challa before then taking his suit's gloves and stabbing Rhodes through the chest with its claws. Upon returning to Stark Tower with the vibranium, he's then confronted by Tony, who'd learned what really happened through footage captured by his AI Jarvis. So he locks Killmonger in his garage with a completed model of the Liberator drone to be killed. But this doesn't work out, as Killmonger manages to take it down with a Wakandan spear before then sending the spear through Tony's chest, whose death results in the US military taking control of Stark Industries, and they order for the Liberator drones to be put into production in preparation for a war against the Wakandans, who they believe murdered Tony. Once the drones are manufactured, Killmonger again meets with Klaue so that he can bring him to the border of Wakanda. But once there, Killmonger suddenly kills him and then brings his corpse into Wakanda as a sign of his loyalty, explaining that he's the son of Prince Unjobu in Jadaka and wants to help them in their war against the Americans, and King T'Chaka welcomes him with open arms. So, he leads Wakanda's army in their battle against the US's drones, which they ultimately manage to destroy, and as a reward for his bravery, Eric is made the new Black Panther. But although he believes he's tricked everyone into giving him what he wants, we see that there are two people that know the truth, with those two being Shuri and Pepper, the former of whom tracks down the latter and suggests they show the world who he really is. The next tale from the multiverse we see begins in 2010, as Odin, the king of Asgard, falls into the Odin sleep to restore his power, while his wife Frigga heads off to celebrate the solstice with her sisters, leaving their son Thor, who in this universe is an only child, all alone. And as Frigga leaves, she makes Thor promise he won't throw any parties, since they always cause trouble. But Thor immediately goes back on this, and gathers Lady Sif, the Warriors 3, and various others from throughout the galaxy, to throw a huge party on what he believes to be the lamest planet of all the 9 realms, planet Earth, since there, they won't need to worry about his mother or Heimdall paying attention to what they're doing. His partying soon interrupted though by Dr. Jane Foster, who along with her intern Darcy Lewis had been studying a mysterious weather event just before Thor and his friends arrived. So, hoping to gain a better understanding of all of this, she approaches Thor, but instead of really learning anything, she quickly becomes infatuated with him and decides to join in on the partying. The next morning, she's then awakened by agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., who she tried to call earlier to warn them that an alien invasion was about to occur. So they've arrived hoping she'll have a solution, but she doesn't actually want to get rid of Thor now, so she's no help. And they're instead forced to call in Captain Marvel to take him out and put an end to his and his friends' destruction of their planet. Upon learning that they plan on taking him out permanently though, Jane thinks up a better idea, believing that, since Thor exists, maybe an Odin, Frigga, and Heimdall do too. So she uses satellites to send a signal to Heimdall, which quickly works in getting his attention, and he then transports her to Frigga so she can inform her of Thor's whereabouts. And this prompts his mother to use dark magic to check in on and inform him that she'll be coming to see if he's actually studying like he said he would be. So, not wanting his mother to learn of his lies, he, along with his party guests, work together to clean up the planet and return it back to the way it was just before Frigga arrives to take him home. He does later head back to Earth though, to meet with and thank Jane for doing the right thing, as well as ask her out, and she says yes. Now that we've gotten all of that out of the way, we can finally see what threat leads the Watcher to consider violating his oath. And it turns out to be Ultron, who who in our universe had his plans of nuclear genocide thwarted by the Avengers after they got hold of the cradle containing the synthesoid body he was planning on uploading himself into, and instead uploaded Tony Stark's AI, Jarvis, to create Vision. But in this universe, the Avengers were never able to gain possession of the body, and in turn stop Ultron from uploading himself into it. So, with the infinite power of the Mind Stone, he's able to complete his mission. He doesn't just stop there though, as shortly following his victory, he's met by the Mad Titan Thanos, wielding the other 5 Infinity Stones. But before he can even attempt to use them, Ultron slices him in two with a blast from the Mind Stone, allowing him to gain possession of all 6 stones, which he then uses to destroy every corner of the universe. With his mission finally complete, Ultron finds himself without a purpose. That is until, as the Watcher explains, Ultron ascends to a previously unattainable level of consciousness.
He became aware of the... I see you.
Although frightened and confused by what he'd just seen, the Watcher believes there's still hope for this universe, since Earth still has 2 of its mightiest heroes, Hawkeye and Black Widow, who'd managed to avoid Ultron's attack on Earth while in space in the Avengers Quinjet. And we see them now in an old Hydra base in Siberia, where they quickly find a computer containing the mind of Arnim Zola, who they believe could be the key to taking Ultron down. So they upload his mind into one of Clint's trick arrows, and then transfer it into an Ultron sentry, through which Zola attempts to connect to and dismantle the Ultron hive mind, but he finds himself unable to. Before they can understand why that is, a bunch of sentries come storming into the facility, and the heroes struggle to keep them at bay. So Clint's forced to sacrifice himself in order to create an explosion and destroy the bots, while Natasha escapes with Zola. And once having escaped, Zola explains that he was unable to connect to the hive because Ultron's not currently within the observable universe. And we see this is due to him having made his way into the nexus of all realities and begun attacking the Watcher, who he sends crashing through various universes before nearly killing him. But the Watcher just manages to escape, and then travels into the pocket dimension Strange Supreme had been imprisoned in earlier, as he's finally decided to violate his oath and needs Strange's help in order to save the multiverse. Along with Strange, he also brings in the previously mentioned variants of Captain Carter, Star-Lord, Killmonger, and Thor, as well as a variant of Gamora, who'd managed to defeat Thanos, and names them his Guardians of the Multiverse, believing they have the perfect combination of skills and experience to defeat Ultron. So the heroes prepare a plan for battle, in which they'll look to remove the Soul Stone from Ultron's armor and use Gamora's Infinity Crusher made on Nidavellir to destroy it, and things seem to immediately go pretty well, with T'Challa eventually managing to steal the Soul Stone in the midst of their battle. And once he does that, the heroes then travel back to the universe Ultron had originated and leave him to be attacked by the zombies we met earlier, specifically the zombie variant of Wanda Maximoff. Upon landing in this other universe though, the heroes are promptly met by Earth's remaining survivor, Natasha, who eventually joins the team as well after Peggy, who in her universe is one of Natasha's closest friends, manages to gain her trust. The team's then met again by Ultron following his battle with the zombies, but he's just too late as Gamora's still able to destroy the stone, or so they'd hoped, as they quickly realize that the device is only able to destroy the stones in her universe and not his. So he's once again able to gain possession of it and looks to rid of them once and for all. But his attempt is then thwarted by Peggy and Natasha, with the latter still in possession of the arrow containing Zola's mind, shooting it into Ultron's eye just as Peggy manages to remove his mask, and this allows Zola to destroy him from within. But immediately following their victory, Killmonger connects his suit to Ultron's armor and takes the stones for himself, believing the Watcher owes them for their service, and he offers the others a chance to use them as well to fix their respective universes, but they refuse, so he attacks them. But his attack's soon interrupted by Zola, now controlling Ultron's body, as he attempts to take the stones as well. And in the midst of their struggle, Strange realizes that their mission wasn't to win, but to separate the stones from the body. So he traps Zola and Killmonger inside a pocket dimension, which turns out to be the exact outcome the Watcher foresaw. With the multiverse saved, the Watcher then returns Strange to his pocket dimension to watch over Zola and Killmonger, and ensure they never escape, while the others are sent back to their respective universes, except for Natasha, since there's nothing left for her in hers. So he instead sends her to the universe we looked at earlier that lost their Black Widow, and she helps their new team of Avengers defeat Loki and his army. Meanwhile, back in Captain Carter's universe, she reunites with her Natasha, who then reveals she's discovered something she might want to see, with that something being the Hydra Stomper, inside of which Natasha hints may be Peggy's lost lover. Returning to our main Marvel universe now, although not yet to the present, as we're first brought back to around 1,000 years ago to learn the history of the criminal and terrorist organization, the Ten Rings, who were first seen back in 2008 when they captured Tony Stark, and whose reputation was used by Aldrich Killian to create the Mandarin. But we learn the organization was really built by a man named Zhu Wenwu, following his discovery of 10 incredibly powerful mystical rings, which gave him the strength of gods and the gift of eternal life, as well as helped him gain an abundance of money and power. Still, even with this power, Wenwu still seeked more. So, by 1996, he began researching the legend of Ta Lo, a hidden village with mystical creatures and ancient magic, where people practice a martial arts style from the gods. But, upon arriving where he believed it to be located, he was instead met by a woman named Ying Li, who he asked to take him there, but she refused, resulting in a battle between the two, during which they showcased their differing styles of combat, before Ying Li ultimately came out victorious. This encounter, though, began what would grow into a romantic relationship between the two, and they'd eventually give birth to their son, Shang-Chi, who we now meet in the present, working as a hotel valet with his best friend Katie Chen in San Francisco, and now going by the name Sean. On their way to work the following day, though, their lives take a sudden turn, as a man approaches and threatens Sean to hand over the pendant around his neck, which we saw earlier was given to him by his mother, but he refuses, so the man and a few others go to attack him, forcing Sean to showcase his premier fighting abilities, to the shock of Katie, and he manages to take out almost all of them outside of Razor Fist, an assassin with a machete prosthesis, but he eventually takes him out too, although only to realize after that they still managed to get hold of his pendant. So he makes plans of heading to find his sister, Su Xialing, in Macau, since during the fight, Razor Fist made the claim that he and his sister deserve what's coming, and Katie decides to tag along so she can learn of who Sean really is. On the plane, he explains that, following his mother's death, his father began training him to be a Ten Rings assassin, and by 14, he was deemed ready to take on his first mission. But Sean claims he ultimately couldn't go through with it, and instead decided to run away. They then arrive in Macau and head to the location written on a postcard he'd recently supposedly received from his sister, which turns out to be the home of the Golden Daggers Club. And Shang-Chi, upon entering, accidentally signs up to take part in one of their fights, which takes place following one between Wong and the Abomination, the latter of whom had been locked up in the DODC's Supermax prison, and not the Raft as we claimed in our Phase 1 recap, ever since his battle with the Hulk in Harlem, but was secretly broken out by Wong for this fight, after which he's taken right back to his cell following Wong's victory. It's soon revealed, though, that Shang-Chi's opponent is actually Zhu Xialing, who appears frustrated with her brother not pulling any punches, and we soon learn why she's so upset, as Shang-Chi had promised he'd return home after his mission, but he ultimately never did. So 6 years following his exit, she left as well, and built up her own organization with the knowledge and combat skills she was forced to teach herself, as her father refused to train or even look at her, claiming she reminded him too much of her late mother. Following her victory, Shang-Chi confronts her about the postcard she'd sent, but she claims it wasn't from her before the building's suddenly infiltrated by the Ten Rings, one of whom's assassins, known as Death Dealer, manages to steal Xialing's pendant, although Shang-Chi soon tracks him down and the two engage in a back-and-forth brawl that's eventually interrupted by the arrival of Wenwu, who has his men transport Shang-Chi, Xialing, and Katie back to his home. Once there, he explains why he'd seek them out, as he believes their mother's still alive, and reveals that he'd recently heard her call out to him, seeking his help to save her from her people in Ta Lo, who he believes have locked her there as punishment for falling in love with a man they deemed unworthy. He also reveals that their pendants are actually keys to a magical map that shows the path to Ta Lo, guarded by a moving forest maze, and which only opens once a year, 3 days from the present. So he plans on making the journey to save his wife, and if they refuse to allow him entry, he'll burn their village to the ground. Shang-Chi and Xialing think this entire idea is crazy though, and refuse to go through with destroying their mother's home. So Wenwu has them and Katie locked up alongside his other prisoner, Trevor Slattery, who explains that, after unknowingly pretending to be a terrorist, he served some time in federal prison until he was broken out by Wenwu, originally to kill him. But after he started doing his personal performance of Macbeth, he was instead basically made his jester. Also locked up in there with Trevor, we see as a mythical creature he's nicknamed Morris, who apparently grew up with Shang-Chi and Xialing's mother in Ta Lo, before later being found and captured by Wenwu during one of his expeditions to find the village, which Morris also reveals he could guide them to without waiting for the path to open, although it would be very dangerous, but they ultimately agree to it, seeing no other options before them. So, after escaping their cell through an underground tunnel, they're able to drive out to the forest and ultimately make it through the maze to Ta Lo, where they're promptly met by their mother's sister, Ying Nan, who explains that they are in fact not holding their mother prisoner, but rather their father is being manipulated by the Dweller in Darkness and its army of Soul Eaters. She further explains that thousands of years ago, their people were attacked by the Dweller in Darkness and its army as they devoured every soul in their path. But eventually, Ta Lo and the rest of the world were saved by the emergence of the Great Protector, aiding their warriors in locking the creatures in the Dark Gate, which have since attempted to break free by promising others their greatest desires, but have still yet to succeed. As they prepare for Wenwu and the Ten Rings' arrival, we're taken back to the night of Ying Li's death, and we come to learn that the men that killed her were former enemies of Wenwu, who wasn't home to protect her, nor could he have even if he was, as the two had given up their powers upon getting married. But with her dead, Wenwu promptly fell right back into his old ways and wielded the Ten Rings once again to kill some of the men involved in her murder. It wasn't until Shang-Chi was 14 though that he'd managed to track down the boss behind the hit. So for his first mission, Shang-Chi was sent to kill him. And although he claimed earlier that he didn't go through with it, he reveals to Katie now that that was a lie, as well as that he plans on returning to that dark place once again to kill his father, who arrives the next day with his army, quickly resulting in a huge battle, during which Shang-Chi attempts to take his father one-on-one, but he appears to still be no match for him, and he's soon knocked into the lake and left to drown, allowing Wenwu to make his way to the Dark Gate, which he promptly breaches, allowing Soul Eaters to begin devouring the souls of those on the battlefield and bring them back to the Dweller in Darkness, with each soul making it stronger. The Ta Lo and Ten Rings warriors, though, who've decided to work together since only Ta Lo's dragon skin based weaponry is capable of killing the creatures, are soon aided in their battle as the Great Protector once again emerges from the ocean along with Shang-Chi, who leaps off the creature to continue his battle with his father, now using a combat style that more closely resembles his mother's, ultimately allowing him to gain control of the rings. But although he could use them to finally kill Wenwu, he decides not to and relinquishes them back to him, opting to instead attempt to rid his father of his delusions through words. That's soon interrupted though, as the Dweller comes crashing out from behind the Dark Gate and goes to attack them. So, realizing the damage he's caused, Wenwu sacrifices himself to save his son, transferring him the rings as he dies. And following his death, Xialing comes flying in on the Great Protector to battle the evil creature, which Shang-Chi, the Great Protector, Xialing, and even Katie's help ultimately manages to kill using the rings. Following a memorial for all of Ta Lo and the Ten Rings' fallen soldiers, Sean and Katie return to San Francisco and try to tell the story of what happened to their friends, Sue and John. But they have a hard time believing any of it. That is until Wong suddenly arrives through a portal and asks for them to join him at Kamertage so he can take a look at the rings along with his fellow superheroes, Bruce Banner and Captain Marvel. But none of them can figure out where this kind of technology could have come from, although they do find that inside there's some sort of beacon sending a message to an unknown recipient. Meanwhile, we see Xialing has returned to the Ten Rings headquarters and has now become the organization's new leader. Diving into more previously untold history now, as we learn of the supposed origin of the near immortal synthetic beings known as the Eternals. Before the dawn of creation or the six singularities came the Celestials, the universe's first form of existence, with the prime celestial Arishem creating the first sun and bringing light into the universe, where life began and thrived until a species of predators known as deviants emerged from deep space to feed on intelligent life. So, to restore the natural order, Arishem sent the Eternals, immortal heroes from the planet Olympia, to eliminate the creatures, with their first mission taking place in the year 5000 BC on planet Earth. The 10 Eternals include Icarus, who has the ability to fly and can shoot laser beams out of his eyes, Makari, who's capable of running at superhuman speeds and is also the only deaf Eternal, Kingo, who can project cosmic energy from his hands and fingertips, Gilgamesh, who can project a cosmic energy enhanced shield on his arms and fists that enhances his strength and durability, Thena, a great warrior known as the Goddess of War, who can conjure any handheld weapon, Sprite, an eternally adolescent girl who can create illusions, Phastos, who can create any invention or weapon, Druig, who has the ability to control minds, Ajak, the leader of the Eternals, who can use cosmic energy to heal injuries or illnesses for herself and others, and is also the only Eternal permitted to communicate with the Celestials, and Cersei, who can transmute matter into other forms. We then jump forward to the present day, where we see Cersei's now working as a science teacher in London and dating one of her colleagues, Dane Whitman, whose birthday party she later attends. She hasn't yet told him about her superhuman abilities though, or of her origin that goes back centuries, but Dane's sort of starting to catch on, although he's guessing she's just a wizard. Also joining them at the party is Sprite, who's currently living with Cersei, and there she attempts to disguise herself as an older woman, but the illusion doesn't really work out. On their way home after the party, the two end up being forced to reveal the truth to Dane, as Sprite and Cersei are attacked by a deviant, all of which they thought they'd killed years ago, and whom normally focused their attacks on humans, but this one is now instead targeting the two Eternals. So they attempt to use their powers against it, but are quickly overpowered and nearly killed, until they're saved just in time by a returning Icarus, who wounds it with a blast. But, to their surprise, the creature is able to heal itself just like Ajax, although it's still ultimately forced to run off by Icarus. After escaping, Cersei explains the whole truth of her history to Dane, leading him to ask why the Eternals didn't help fight against Thanos or during any of the other terrible things throughout history, and she reveals they were advised not to interfere in any human conflicts, as it wouldn't allow them to develop properly on their own. Dane also asks about Icarus, and we learn that he and Cersei were together for 5,000 years before he just left and never came back, so she decided to move on. She then leaves Dane to meet back up with him and Sprite, and Icarus apologizes for hurting her and says he'll leave her to be with Dane once he knows she's safe. So the three discuss their next move and decide to go find the others, beginning with Ajax. Upon arriving at her home in South Dakota though, they find that she's already encountered and been killed by the deviant they fought earlier, and that the creature had actually absorbed her powers. And following this revelation, Icarus and Sprite reminisce about Ajax in her home, while Cersei, still kneeling over her body, is suddenly transferred her ability to communicate with Arishem, who she meets for the first time, although their encounter is short-lived. She then informs the others of what just happened, but Icarus is skeptical that she really spoke to Arishem, and worries that she might have Mad Weary, which we learn through a flashback of a war during 1521 AD is when one's mind is fractured under the weight of their memories. And we see that Thena actually suffers from this disorder, which prompted her to attack her fellow Eternals. So Ajax suggested they have her memory erased so she can start over, since it's the only cure. But Gilgamesh instead offered to look after her, not wanting her to forget everything they've been through. This whole ordeal though had prompted Druig to let out years of built-up frustration, with him particularly furious with the destruction the humans are causing and their inability to stop them. So he decided to take matters into his own hands and put them under his mind control, before telling Ajax that, if she wants to stop him, they'll have to kill him. Returning to the present now, as the group has made their way to Mumbai and tracked down Kingo, who's now a leading man in Bollywood and has been for over 100 years by pretending to be his own ancestors. And we're also introduced to his valet, Karun, who he's told all about the Eternals. Once he's done filming a scene for his new film, they inform him of the Deviant's return and Ajax's death. So he, along with Karun, decide to join them in tracking down the others, the next of which being Gilgamesh and Thena in Australia. Once there, they see that Gilgamesh has encountered and killed another Deviant, before the group then heads inside and eats a nice meal together, although Cersei soon exits to try and speak with Arishem again, which she eventually figures out how to do, and she informs him of what happened to Ajax and that something strange is happening to Earth. As earlier we saw during one of her classes that the entire globe had suffered a massive earthquake, and he explains that it's just a side effect of the emergence to bring forth the celestial Tiamat, which he reveals was the true purpose of their mission. He further explains that every billion years a new celestial must be born, as without them, the universe will fall into darkness and all life will die. So he plants celestial seeds into host planets across the universe, and Earth was chosen to host Tiamat. But in order to grow, the celestial needs its host planet's population to grow as well, so it can feed on intelligent life's energy. So to protect the planet's human population from predators, Arishem at first created the Deviants, but they eventually evolved and became predators themselves, so he then sent the Eternals to eradicate them, who it turns out have been helping Celestials emerge for millions of years, as their home planet of Olympia doesn't exist and they were actually created by Arishem in the World Forge, where he's also stored their memories following each emergence, as they're subsequently reset. Now though, Earth's population has reached the required amount, and the emergence is ready to begin, so he warns Cersei not to fail him. Following this revelation, Cersei informs the others of what she's learned, and they're conflicted over whether or not to stop the emergence. So Icarus suggests they track down the remaining 3 Eternals before they decide on what to do next. and they agree. Next, tracking down Druig, who they find living in a village completely under his control. They quickly catch him up on everything that's happened so far, which proves to be pretty overwhelming, so he exits to think. And while he does that, the others scatter around the village, with Sprite spying on Icarus before being confronted by Kingo, who's deduced that Sprite is actually in love with the former, prompting her to express her frustration with the way she was made. Not too long after this, the heroes are suddenly attacked by the returning deviants, with Icarus, Gilgamesh, and Thana encountering the deviant that had killed and absorbed Ajax's power earlier. This attack once again triggers Thana though, resulting in her attacking Icarus. But Gilgamesh is soon able to calm her down and has her hide while he continues to fight off the deviant, and Icarus goes to help the others, who have also gained the help of Druig, and together they're able to kill the remaining predators, the last of them being killed by Cersei, who, after being knocked into the pond with it, was able to transform it into a massive tree, shocking herself and the others as she didn't believe she could use her powers on sentient beings. Gilgamesh, meanwhile, has continued his battle with the more powerful deviant, which soon notices Thana hiding and rushes towards her, forcing Gilgamesh to block its path, which allows it to pierce through his body multiple times and absorb his powers. This results in the continued evolution of the creature, later named Crow, with him now having the ability to speak, and he reveals that, through the absorption of their powers, he's also able to access their memories, and expresses his plans of killing each of them for what they've done to his kind before being forced to run off by Icarus, as Gilgamesh ultimately succumbs to his wounds and dies in Thana's arms. To honor him, the heroes hold a funeral ceremony and have him cremated, with Thana scattering his ashes in the river before they continue their search for the remaining Eternals, next tracking down Phastos, who Druig claims gave up on humans a long time ago, and we see why in a flashback to August 1945, following the atomic bombing of Hiroshima, as Phastos sat amongst the destruction in tears alongside Ajax, and expressed his guilt for helping their technology advance with his creations, before claiming their mission to protect these people was a mistake. Once they track him down though, they find him and his husband Ben playing catch with their son Jack, both of whom he later claims have given him faith in the good of humanity once again. But he still declines to help, preferring to be by his family's side when it all ends. Although he's ultimately encouraged to go by Ben, who says if there's any chance for them to watch their son live a life of his own, they have to take it. So he says goodbye to his family and joins the others to find the last of the Eternals, Makari, who's been living in their ship, the Domo. And there, they begin forming a plan that would allow Druig to control Tiamat's mind and stop the emergence, as he's not strong enough to do it on his own. And Phastos claims he could create a device that would form what he calls a unimind, and allow Druig to absorb all of their energy. So he begins putting together the devices, and while he does that, we're taken to a flashback from before Ajax's death 6 days ago, with her being met at her home by Icarus, who, it turns out, she had already told about the emergence. But with it approaching, she suggested that they reform the team and try to stop it, feeling there's something special about the people of Earth that was worth saving. But Icarus refused to betray Airsham and the Celestials, so he led her to the last of the deviants, which had been frozen in ice for centuries before recently breaking out as the effects of the emergence heated up the Earth's core and allowed them to attack and kill her. We then return to the present as Cersei approaches him, acknowledging that she knows he doesn't agree with their plan, and he responds claiming that, although he doesn't mind leaving this planet, he wishes that he'd still remember her when he does. Following this, Cersei senses that the emergence has begun, so Phastos sends Makari to run across the planet and find the point of it. But as she does that, Icarus enters the lab and suddenly destroys Phastos' creation, before revealing the truth of what happened to Ajax and his knowledge of the emergence. Makari then returns, having found Tiamat, so Icarus attempts to blast her, but instead hits Kingo in the shoulder as he dives in front to protect her. And after she runs out of the ship, Kingo aims towards Icarus, so he goes to leave and is joined in his exit by Sprite. Kingo also exits shortly after them, as he doesn't believe the emergence should be stopped either, and claims that, even with his help, they wouldn't be able to stop Icarus. The rest of the Eternals still plan on moving forward with the Unimind though, which Phastos ultimately manages to create the devices for using the sphere inside Cersei that allowed her to communicate with Airsham. So they then travel to the point of the emergence, and while Cersei, Makari, and Druig begin to form the Unimind, Thana battles Icarus. He soon realizes she's being used as a distraction though, so he tracks down Druig and promptly sends him crashing through the ground, infuriating Makkari, who Druig had shared romantic feelings with, so she relentlessly attacks him alongside Thana and Phastos. Crow soon joins the battle as well, prompting Thana to try and kill the creature herself, but during their brawl, her Mad Weary appears to once again be triggered as Crow pretends to speak to her as Gilgamesh, allowing him to begin absorbing her power, but she fortunately snaps out of it and manages to kill him. Meanwhile, Phastos and Makkari have continued their fight with Icarus, while Cersei is headed closer to the point of the emergence to try and transform Tiamat as she did the Deviant earlier. But she's soon interrupted by an illusion of Ajax created by Sprite, who uses this distraction to stab Cersei through the back. She then vents her built-up frustrations from living amongst humanity for centuries, which she explains she's hated, as they remind her of all the things she isn't able to experience herself, like growing up, falling in love, or building a family. So she's glad to be moving on to somewhere new. She's soon interrupted and knocked out by a still alive Druig though, who's realized he isn't powerful enough to control Tiamat, even with the Unimind. So he tells Cersei it's her fight now. And Cersei, as Tiamat finally begins to appear above the surface, uses her power to freeze over him until she's soon approached by Icarus, who'd fought free of Phastos and Makkari and who prepares to kill her. But he ultimately can't find it within himself to do it, so he instead joins the Unimind, allowing her to completely transform Tiamat into stone, successfully preventing the emergence for now. A teary-eyed Icarus then apologizes to Cersei before flying straight into the sun to his presumed death, while the rest of the heroes regroup, and Cersei, still holding some energy from the Unimind, offers to make Sprite a human, to which she agrees. We then jump ahead 2 weeks, just as Phastos had completed fixing up the battle-damaged Domo, which Druig, Makkari, and Thana hop back on to travel throughout space, while Kingo has now begun looking over Sprite as she starts up school, and Cersei is reunited with Dane. But the good times are soon put on hold, as Airsham suddenly appears outside of Earth's orbit and abducts the three Eternals still on Earth, Cersei, Phastos, and Kingo, to evaluate their memories and decide whether humans really deserve to live or die. A few weeks later, Makkari, Druig, and Thana are seen questioning why the others haven't contacted them, and prepare to go back and check on them until they're suddenly met by a small man named Pip, appearing through a portal, who then introduces them to the Royal Prince of Titan and brother of Thanos, Star Fox, aka Eros, who informs them that their friends are in big trouble, but he knows where to find them. Meanwhile, Dane, after seeing Cersei being taken from Earth by Airsham, has found himself in the possession of the Ebony Blade, an ancient enchanted sword, which he's learned once belonged to his ancestors. But as he goes to wield it, he's met by an unknown voice.
Sure you're ready for that, Mr. Whitman?
Moving on now and heading to New York City, although back in 2012, to meet a young Kate Bishop and her parents, Derek and Eleanor, who were seen arguing over finances, with Eleanor suggesting the possibility of them selling their penthouse to the displeasure of Derek, as well as Kate, who'd been eavesdropping from her room. But her father tells her not to worry and that they'll figure things out. Not too long after he heads back downstairs to his office though, things take a sudden turn for the worst, as Loki and the Chitauri army begin attacking the city, resulting in their home being partially destroyed. But there is a glimmer of hope in the midst of the destruction for Kate, who witnesses some of the Battle of New York from afar, as Hawkeye takes down Chitauri soldiers with his bow and arrow. The destruction caused by the battle, though, ultimately results in Derek being lost in and dying amongst the rubble, which leads Kate, motivated by her father's death, as well as Hawkeye's heroics, to begin practicing archery, which she becomes highly skilled at by the time she is a 22-year-old college student, as well as in martial arts, collecting multiple medals and trophies for each of them over the years. Things seem to have worked out pretty well for her mother too since then, as now, in the present, she owns her own security company and they appear to have become wealthier than ever. She's also found herself a new man named Jack Duquesne, with whom she's recently become engaged. But Kate feels there's something off about Jack, as well as his uncle Armand Duquesne III. And this feeling's made even greater when, while in attendance at a charity gala that night, she overhears Armand threatening her mother from another room, with him stating, "I have powerful friends too, the kind you don't want to mess with." So Kate continues to do some snooping, and follows him into a secret black market auction within the building, which Jack is also seen taking part in, and she watches as the two bid against one another for the Ronin's blade, recovered from the wreckage of the Avengers compound, and which Armand ultimately wins possession of. The next item up for auction is the companion piece for the sword, the Ronin's suit. But before anyone can bid on it, there's a sudden explosion caused by the Tracksuit Mafia, who've arrived in search of a particular watch, and the commotion actually allows Jack to steal Ronin's sword for himself, while Kate finds herself stumbling upon Ronan's suit, which she promptly puts on before then attacking the tracksuits to allow those in attendance to escape. After taking a majority of them out, she then looks to escape as well, and as she does, she comes across a one-eyed dog attacking another member of the tracksuits. So she decides to take it home with her and feeds it a slice of pizza, later resulting in it receiving the name Pizza Dog, before she heads out once again to confront Armand at his home about the night's events. But once having snuck inside, she finds Armand dead on the floor, so she quickly rushes out of there, though only to soon be met by the tracksuits, who go to attack her, but they're fortunately taken out before they can do any real damage by who turns out to be Hawkeye. Throughout all this going on with Kate, Clint Barton had been spending the day in New York City with his kids, Nathaniel, Lila, and Cooper, as a quick holiday vacation before they headed back home the following day. But his plans were soon interrupted, as on the news, he saw an image of Kate in his Ronin suit, so he headed out to track her down and was shocked to find out that she's just some kid. Frustrated, he brings her back to her apartment so she can hand over the suit. But things are once again made difficult when the tracksuits, who found out where Kate lived earlier when she dropped off the dog, arrive outside and begin throwing Molotov cocktails through the window, resulting in a huge fire that the two are fortunately able to make it out of. In need of a place to lay low, Kate heads over to her aunt's apartment, who's in Florida for the winter, while Clint meets back up with his kids to finish packing and send them off to the airport the next morning, since he'll need to stay in New York for a bit longer to handle this Ronin stuff. But he does promise he'll be home in 5 days for Christmas. Kate, meanwhile, leaves that same morning for work at her mom's security company, and there she also encounters Jack, who she suspects was behind Armand's murder. So that night at dinner, she tries to pry the truth out of him, but ultimately gets nowhere. Although her suspicions are raised when, just before she leaves, Jack offers her an Armand III butterscotch, which she'd seen previously on the table next to Armand's dead body. She then tries to call up Clint and inform him of this clue, but he's currently dealing with the tracksuits, who he'd purposely gotten himself captured by, in hopes of speaking to their boss so he can clear Kate's name. Those plans are interrupted though, when Kate, who tracked Clint down using her mom's company's app, comes crashing through the ceiling in an attempt to help him, allowing herself to be captured as well, which the tracksuits then inform of to their boss, Maya Lopez. To learn a bit about Maya, we're taken back to 2007 when she was just a kid in elementary school, where she proved to be a strong student despite her being deaf. We also see a bit later, while she's at karate class, that she has a prosthetic leg, but that doesn't appear to be holding her back, and she actually becomes a very skilled fighter by the time she's an adult, working under her father, William Lopez, who she shared a loving relationship with as a member of the Tracksuit Mafia, which he led up until his death at the hands of Ronin. So ever since then, Maya's been waiting for Ronin to return so she could avenge her father's death, and she believes she's now finally gained that opportunity. Clint, though, explains that Kate's not actually the Ronin, and claims that they'd already been killed at the hands of Natasha Romanoff, but she doesn't believe him and begins strangling Kate, so he breaks free of their custody and engages in a brawl with her, throughout which Maya mostly has the upper hand. But he eventually gets hold of his bow and arrow and manages to make it out of the building with Kate. With this whole situation continuing to get bigger and bigger, Maya's approached by her second-in-command, Kazi, and he warns her that if they continue to go after Ronin, they'll only be drawing more attention to themselves, which their boss wouldn't like. But she's too fired up to stop now, and instead orders him to look into Clint. He and Kate, meanwhile, not sure exactly what to do next about the tracksuits, momentarily shift their focus to the Jack situation, with Kate having Clint sneak into her mom's penthouse along with her so they can look through her company's files for some evidence against him. Before they can begin looking into Jack though, Kate's suddenly locked out of the account, and Clint's then met in the hallway by Jack, wielding the Ronin's blade. But he and Eleanor quickly realize that Clint's an Avenger, so Jack lowers his weapon, and Kate explains that she and Clint are actually working on a mission together to catch a bad guy. Later, after Clint exits while also covertly stealing back his sword, he has them again shift their attention, this time to a matter involving his wife, who it turns out was the owner of the watch the tracksuits were looking for earlier, and she's now gotten a signal on her transmitter that's revealed it's in New York. So he and Kate head over to its location, but once arriving there, Kate realizes that it's actually inside of Maya's apartment, who then appears and attacks her, while Clint, who'd been watching from a rooftop across the street, is attacked by an unknown assailant. Kate and Maya soon end up on the rooftop as well via zipline, and the former eventually forces the latter to retreat with an arrow through the shoulder, while Clint manages to remove his attacker's mask just before being shocked with a widow's bite, revealing them to be Yelena Belova, who then runs off as well after Kate aims her arrow at her. We're then taken back to 2018 and to when Yelena was still searching for and helping rid other Black Widows of the Red Room's control, with her and another widow named Sonya now breaking into where they think a widow named Anna is being held captive. But it turns out to actually be her home, as she had already rid herself of the Red Room's control and has since begun killing for money. Following this encounter, Yelena entered the bathroom for a moment, but she unfortunately wouldn't return from it for another 5 years as she was suddenly snapped out of existence by Thanos. And upon her return, she learned of Natasha's death, which later led her to give up her pursuit of the other widows and begin killing for money as well, with her current job, as we saw earlier, being to kill Clint. So, having failed to kill him the first time, she now sneaks into Kate's lone apartment in hopes that she'll know where he is. And in their discussion, Yelena explains why Clint must die, as she believes he was the cause of Natasha's death, prompting Kate to have her question if the person that hired her is really telling the truth. Meanwhile, Clint has prepared to put an end to this situation with Maya, to whom he'd sent an anonymous message to meet with Ronin at the location of her father's murder. So she does, along with the tracksuits, who Clint, as the Ronin, promptly takes out before engaging in a one-on-one brawl with Maya, who he eventually manages to take down. But instead of killing her, he reveals his secret identity and explains what led up to her father's murder, as he'd actually been tipped off by an informant sent by her boss, who he claims wanted her father dead. This accusation angers her though, so she knocks him down and grabs hold of his sword, but before she can kill him, it's knocked out of her hands by Kate, who then escapes with Clint back to her aunt's apartment, where things later become even more personal, as Kate receives a message from Yelena, who after their conversation earlier, decided to look into who hired her, and now reveals that it was actually Kate's mother, Eleanor, who she's also learned is working for Maya's boss, Wilson Fisk, also known as the Kingpin. We're then taken to meet Fisk for the first time when he's met by Eleanor, who's arrived to discuss her exit from his business, as she's done everything he's asked, including killing Armand, as well as paid back any debts her husband owed prior to his death. But her resignation frustrates Fisk, and he becomes even more so when he's later met by Maya, who claims she's ready to move on from her pursuit of the Ronin, but he can tell by this quick turnaround that she's learned the truth. So he orders Kazi to deal with her, Eleanor, and Hawkeye, as well as remind everyone that this city belongs to him. Back to Kate and Clint, who had seen the entire conversation between her mother and Fisk thanks to Yelena, as they prepare to confront Eleanor at her holiday party that night. But just when Kate finds her, Kazi opens fire from a building across the street at Clint, who fortunately manages to avoid him. He and Kate then exit the building and are promptly met by the tracksuits, who the heroes are soon aided in taking out by Jack wielding a sword, while they use various trick arrows to take out the rest of them. And once they've been dealt with, Kate goes to look for her mom while Clint stays back to deal with Kazi. But their encounter is interrupted when the former is attacked by Yelena, and the latter is attacked by Maya. Maya's come hoping she can convince Kazi to join her in leaving life under Fisk's control, but he refuses and goes to kill her, forcing her to stab him in the abdomen instead. Meanwhile, as Yelena attacks Clint, he tries to explain that Natasha chose to sacrifice herself despite his efforts to stop her. And although Yelena doesn't want to believe this, she eventually accepts the truth and gives up her pursuit of vengeance. Throughout this, Eleanor is headed to her car, where she's immediately met by Fisk, who tears off the car door. But luckily, Kate shows up just then and fires an arrow into his chest. Shockingly though, this has seemingly no effect on him, and he promptly sends her flying with a huge strike, before being suddenly run over by Eleanor. But once again, he quickly recovers from this attack and continues to thwart any attempt Kate makes to take him down. She is eventually able to incapacitate him though, after setting off some firework trick arrows scattered across the floor, and with him knocked out, she shifts her attention back to her mother, who tries to give good reason for all the bad things she's done. But Kate still forces her to take responsibility for her actions and has her arrested. The cops then go to arrest Fisk as well, but he manages to escape just before they enter, although he is soon found by Maya, who he attempts to plead with before she ultimately shoots him seemingly in the face. And now, with everything finally put to bed, Clint's able to return back home to Iowa, luckily just in time for Christmas. And he decides to bring Kate along as well to celebrate with him and his family, as well as set the Ronin suit ablaze. Also, once back at home, Clint returns the watch to Laura, which reveals that she actually used to be an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. Returning to New York once again though, as we're finally able to witness the aftermath of Mysterio revealing to the world that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, including their top choice, MIT. But Peter believes there could be a way to fix this, and he makes his way to the Sanctum Sanctorum to meet with Doctor Strange, who agrees to help him and offers to cast a spell that would make everyone forget he's Spider-Man. Wong though, who now holds the title of Sorcerer Supreme after Strange disappeared for 5 years, disapproves, claiming the spell is too dangerous. But Strange is ultimately able to convince him it'll it'll be okay. So Undercroft, and begins casting the spell, which soon gets out of control, as Peter, after realizing his closest friends and family might forget everything they've ever been through, repeatedly changes the parameters of it, which seemingly begins to break reality, so Strange is forced to shut it down. Seeing how bad things almost just got, Strange refuses to attempt the spell again, saying that if the school rejected him and he failed in convincing them to reconsider, then there's nothing he can do. And after learning Peter didn't even try that yet, he kicks him out. So Peter then heads off and finds the MIT Assistant Vice Chancellor, who's currently stuck in traffic on the bridge, to try and appeal his and his friends' applications. His Spidey sense suddenly puts him on high alert though, as a man currently unknown to him, wielding giant robotic tentacle arms, approaches and asks what he did with his machine, which Peter has no clue about. So,
You're not Peter Parker.
although confused, Peter still manages to gain the advantage upon realizing he can use the nanobots connected to the man's tentacles to take control of them, which he then uses to save the MIT lady, who after witnessing Peter's bravery firsthand, says she'll look into getting him and his friends accepted into the school. Peter then shifts his attention back to the tentacled man, but before he can understand what's going on, his Spidey sense activates once again, as a pumpkin bomb rolls, hence why he helps stop his attacker and revert him back to his human form. After their brawl, Peter explains the situation and sends them both to the Undercroft, inside of which it's revealed that Electro and the Lizard have arrived from the same universe and actually know each other, revealing their names to be Max Dillon and Dr. Kirk Connors. Peter, meanwhile, receives a call from May, who claims to have found Norman Osborn as he'd arrived at her place of work, a charity named Feast, partnered with Spider-Man, hoping to gain Spider-Man's help. May, recognizing his mental instability, tries convincing Peter to help fix whatever he or the others he's found did to themselves in their universe, but Peter believes they'll be better off back home. Upon arriving at the Undercroft, as they were both acclaimed scientists in their universe prior to their respective incidents, and Norman appears puzzled by Otto's current state. But Otto's even more confused, as Norman's supposed to be dead, and Marco interjects to reveal that they actually both died in their battles with Spider-Man, recalling news headlines detailing their deaths, with the Green Goblin having been impaled by his own glider, and Dr. Octopus having drowned in the river with his machine, was being in the middle of absorbing all the world's power, until Spider-Man caused an overload which would have killed him if he hadn't been transported to this new universe. Following these revelations, Strange returns with an ancient relic, inside of which he's trapped the botched spell, called the Machina di Cadavis, that can reverse the spell and send them back to where they came. But Peter, now aware of their respective fates, and May believes she's okay as well. With their mission having gone completely sideways, Peter begins expressing regret for not just listening to Strange, but May still believes he did the right thing.
You have a gift. You have power. And with great power, there must also come great responsibility.
She then suddenly collapses to the floor, that Peter realizes, who after a quick exchange with the other Peter, explains that he's been trying to find their friend ever since he got here, believing he needs their help. And after an embrace from his friends, he meets the two other Spider-Men, who have an equal understanding of what he's going through, with one claiming to be the cause of the woman he loved, Gwen Stacy's death, while the other says his actions led to the death of his Uncle Ben. But they both agree that allowing rage and bitterness to consume them didn't make their losses any better. Still, Peter expresses desires to kill Osborn, but he ultimately chooses to instead help cure the villains one last time, after learning that their Uncle Ben's had given them the same speech on responsibility as May did to him. So the three Peters head into the school science lab and recreate the antidotes, with one Peter creating an anti-serum for Dr. Connors, which he's apparently had to do before in his universe, while the other Peter creates one for his former foe, Dr. Osborn, and the current universe's Peter rebuilds the devices for Dylan and Marco. Once they've completed that, they head over to the top of the Statue of Liberty, which is in the process of being remodeled, and Peter calls into the Daily Bugle to broadcast a message displaying the Machina, hoping it'll lure in the villains. And it soon does. A few weeks following this, we see Peter on his way to MJ's place of work, as he prepares to fulfill the promise he made to her and Ned, both of whom, once inside, he learns actually got accepted into MIT. As he goes to read off the letter he prepared though, he's distracted by a band-aid covering the scar MJ had received during their earlier battle, and he ultimately decides against reading it, believing they'll be safer without him in their lives. Although his friends and family are no longer by his side, Peter seems ready to carry on this new life, with him moving into his own apartment and studying to earn his GED. A scene when, after being alerted of criminal activity on his phone, part of the Venom symbiote was left behind. Heading out of the US and over to London, England now, as we're introduced to Stephen Grant, an employee at the National Art Gallery, who despite his position strictly working in the museum's gift shop, is actually very knowledgeable and a huge fan of Egyptian mythology. Outside of his job, we see he's recently been struggling with what he believes is sleepwalking, so to prevent it, he keeps himself chained to his bed and leaves a trail of sand around it. He's also tried finding ways to just prevent himself from falling asleep, but he ultimately fails in doing so that night, and when he awakens, he finds himself in Austria with a broken jaw that suddenly heals itself. And before he can understand any of this, two men begin shooting at him, so he runs into a nearby village and hides amongst its people, all of whom are revealed to be followers of a man named Arthur Harrow, himself a loyal follower of the Egyptian deity Ammit, some of whom's power he holds within his cane and uses to judge people's morality, along with the scales tattooed on his forearm, which turn green when the person's deemed good and red when they're deemed evil, as they do when he judges an old woman, who he kills as a result. He soon spots Stephen in the crowd though, and orders him to hand over the scarab he stole, which Stephen has no recollection of, but he does find it in his pocket, so he attempts to hand it over but can't, as an unknown force takes control of his body. So Harrow's henchmen attempt to pry it from his hands, resulting in him blacking out, and when he comes to, he finds each of them dead with their blood on his hands. He then rushes into a truck and drives off as more of Harrow's men follow, and their gunfire eventually causes his truck to break down, giving them a clean shot at killing him. But just before they can, he awakens in bed, making it appear this was all a dream. He later learns that's not the case though, after noticing a hole in the wall of his flat, and finding a storage locker key and a cell phone within it, the latter of which he promptly receives a call on from a woman named Layla, who believes him to be someone named Mark, before Stephen then begins hearing a voice calling out to him, which he soon sees is actually himself speaking to him through a mirror, before his room then begins shaking and the lights begin flickering, forcing him to rush to the elevator, inside of which a giant being suddenly appears behind him, although this seems like it may have just been a dream as well, as he once again awakens, now on the bus on his way to work. It isn't long before he finds himself in danger again though, as he's attacked at the end of his shift that night by a jackal sent by Harrow, ordering him to turn over the scarab over the intercom, but he's momentarily able to avoid and hide from the creature in the bathroom, inside of which he's spoken to through the mirrors once again by his alternate personality, Mark Spector, who asks for him to surrender his body so he can save them, and so he does, allowing Mark to transform into Moon Knight and kill the creature. Stephen then once again awakens in his bed, although he's fully aware he's not dreaming now, especially after he's fired for the destruction of the museum's bathroom, which appears on the security footage to have been completely his doing, since the jackal isn't seen in any of it. So, to prove to himself that he's not crazy, Stephen next tracks down the storage locker that key he found earlier is connected to, and inside he finds a bag with a handgun, stacks of money, and a US passport from Mark Spector, as well as the scarab inside, which prompts Mark to confront Stephen through the reflection once again, and reveal the reason behind all of this, explaining that he's the avatar of Khonshu, the ancient Egyptian god of the moon, whose justice he serves out to protect the vulnerable. Stephen's unable to deal with any of this though, so he prepares to just turn himself in to the police, but just as he exits the locker, Khonshu himself begins chasing after him. Stephen still manages to exit the building though, and just then he stumbles upon Layla, who had tracked him down through his phone and gives him a ride back to his place, during which we learn that Layla's actually Mark's wife. Shortly after they arrive at his flat, two detectives show up as well to search the place for an apparent stolen item from the museum, and while doing so, they find the incriminating items in his bag, so they arrest him. It soon turns out though that these people aren't actually cops and are more followers of Harrow, who he's then taken to meet with once again, and who we learn was actually Khonshu's previous avatar, although he felt that Khonshu's retribution would come far too late, as he only serves justice against those who've already committed an evil act, while Ammit judges the morality of all, and rids of evildoers before they can commit said act. Hence why they must resurrect her, and why they need the scarab, as it's a sort of compass to her tomb. So Harrow threatens to use his powerful cane against Stephen if he doesn't hand it over, but he actually doesn't have it since it was earlier found by Layla, who then arrives and urges him to summon the suit while she fights off Harrow's henchmen. But he doesn't know how to, although he quickly figures it out after he's sent flying out the window by another jackal, prompting him to summon what he imagined they meant by suit, and not Khonshu's ceremonial armor. Although suited up, he's still no match for the jackal, so he's forced to give up control to Mark once again, who lures the creature away from the city before impaling it onto a spiked sculpture. Unfortunately though, they lost sight of the scarab during the fight, and it's now found itself in the hands of Harrow. So Mark refuses to return the body to Stephen and prepares to track down Ammit's tomb in Cairo, Egypt, where he quickly encounters and attempts to fight off 3 disciples of Ammit, although they manage to get the better of him and knock him to the ground, resulting in him blacking out and awakening with a knife through one of their throats and the others dead beside him, confusing himself as well as Stephen, who both claim to have not been behind the murders. Even with this, they still find themselves no closer to locating Amit's tomb, so Khonshu decides it's time they get the other gods' attention and sends a signal to the Yanid Council, resulting in a portal opening for Mark to meet with them in the Chamber of the Gods within the Great Pyramid of Giza. Once inside, he meets the avatars of Egyptian gods Hathor, Horus, Isis, Tefnut, and Osiris, before they're each possessed by their respective gods and Mark's possessed by Khonshu, who informs them of Harrow's plans to release Amit, prompting Harrow to be summoned to the council as well. And he, in response, claims Khonshu's the one searching for her tomb, and has been taking advantage of a deeply troubled man to do it, explaining Mark's mental instability to the council. So they ultimately side with Harrow and conclude the matter, although Hathor's avatar, Yatzil, takes pity on Mark and informs him that if he wants to find Amit's tomb, he must first find the stolen sarcophagus of Senfu, as it's said to contain clues to the tomb's location. As he begins his search, he's quickly joined by Layla, who helps track down the sarcophagus's current owner, Anton Mogart, who they meet with under fake identities, although he eventually learns of their deception and holds them at gunpoint until they're then joined by Harrow, who destroys the sarcophagus with his cane, before then personally attacking Layla about her father's death. And he makes the claim that Mark is hiding something from her, prompting him to summon the suit and begin taking out Mogart and his men, while Layla collects the only slightly damaged clues from the sarcophagus. They then escape into the desert, and there Mark finally gives the body up to Steven so he can decipher the clues, since Mark's not well versed on Egyptian mythology. And he quickly does, revealing that Senfu had marked the tomb with a constellation, but since stars drift over time, they're currently unable to translate them into coordinates. That is until Khonshu reveals that, with Steven's help, he can actually turn back the night sky. So they do just that, although their actions result in Khonshu being imprisoned in a Ushapti by the Yanid Council. Still, Steven and Layla continue moving forward without him, and make their way to the marked location. Outside of which, Steven and Layla appear to share a moment, as Layla leans in for a kiss, but Steven interrupts her attempt to reveal why Mark's been pushing her away, explaining that he's just trying to protect her from being made Khonshu's next avatar. But she claims that's not his call to make, and the two kiss anyway before entering the tomb. While searching within it, they end up getting split up, as Layla finds herself at the top of a ledge above an endless pit, before then being met from across it by Harrow, who once again discusses her father's death and reveals what it is Mark's been hiding from her, claiming he was there the night he was killed, which prompts her to storm off. Steven, meanwhile, has come across the tomb of Alexander the Great, who's revealed to have been Amit's last avatar before he betrayed her, and down the throat of his corpse, Steven finds her Ushapti. Layla then enters and forces him to give the body up to Mark so she can confront him about her father's death, and Mark explains that, although he didn't kill her father, he was there to witness his murder, with him having been killed by a fellow mercenary. Following this revelation, Harrow enters as well, although Layla manages to stay hidden as he does, and he promptly shoots Mark in the chest twice. After being shot though, Mark then awakens seated in a wheelchair and sedated at the Putnam Medical Facility, before he's then taken to meet with his doctor, Arthur Harrow, who attempts to talk him through his mental illness as the drugs slowly wear off. But Mark refuses to believe any of this is real and makes a run for it, eventually coming across a room that, inside, contains the tomb of Alexander the Great, inside of which he finds Steven, much to their confusion. But they still continue looking for a way out, at least until they're met by the Egyptian goddess of women and children, Taweret, who reveals that they're actually dead and have now found themselves in the realm of the Juat. That's true nature is impossible for the human mind to comprehend, so they may perceive it as something more recognizable to them. She then takes them out onto her boat, sailing across the sands of the Juat, on their way to the Field of Reeds. Although, in order for them to be accepted there, their hearts and the feather of truth must balance on the scales of justice, and if they don't, the dead will drag them into the Juat, while they'll remain forever frozen in sand. And their chances of surviving don't look too good, as the scales begin to fluctuate wildly, so Taweret has them begin looking through their past memories, which are now behind each door of the hospital, to reveal whatever it is they've been hiding from each other and make their hearts whole. Through the first door, they find a cafeteria filled with the dead bodies of people Mark had killed, as well as a little boy to Steven's shock, and he follows after the boy as he runs away through another door, despite Mark's attempts to stop him. And here Steven sees Mark and his younger brother Randall as they head off to play in the cave. It soon begins raining though, so Randall suggests they go home since their mother told them not to play in the rain. But Mark has them continue on anyway, which proves to be a fatal decision as the cave begins flooding rapidly, and Randall becomes trapped and drowns, while Mark eventually manages to escape. Steven then finds himself in a memory during Randall's Shiva, which Mark also enters through another door, just as their mother lets out her sorrow onto her son. shouting at him that it was all his fault, before the two next relive a memory of one of Mark's birthday celebrations, during which his mother just berates him for killing his brother, prompting him to run upstairs to his room. Steven goes to follow him in there, but Mark drags him away, and they instead find themselves reliving the night Mark became Khonshu's Fist of Vengeance. Mark explains that, after being discharged from the military, he went work for hire for his old commanding officer, Raoul Bushman, and was given a job to raid an Egyptian tomb. But once there, Bushman changed the plan and called for no witnesses, which Mark couldn't live with, so he tried to get everyone out of there, including Layla's father, but they were all killed and Mark was left bleeding to death. But as he went to kill himself within the tomb, he was spoken to by Khonshu, who offered to save his life if he swore to protect the travelers of the night and bring his vengeance to those who would do them harm. And Mark agreed, becoming Moon Knight. Although all this sifting through memories has nearly brought the scales to balance, they're soon interrupted in their endeavor, as fears begun spreading in the upper world due to unbalanced souls being judged or condemned before their time, which they believe must be Harrow's doing, so they ask Toedit to send them back to their body, as well as send word to Layla so she can find Khonshu and they can use his healing powers once again, and she agrees. But first, they still need to get their scales balanced, so Mark, although hesitant, allows Steven to enter the bedroom memory from before, as their mother bangs on the door for Mark to let her in. And these compounding traumatic experiences are revealed to have resulted in Mark creating a second personality named Stephen Grant, based on the main hero, Dr. Stephen Grant, of his favorite movie, Tomb Raider, to act as a shield from his mother's violent outburst. The two then experience one last memory, taking place during their mother's Shiva, which Mark was unable to bring himself to enter, so he instead just stood across the street drinking, before completely breaking down. And this turns out to be the moment his and Steven's lives began bleeding into one another. Still, even after having lived through all these memories, the scales remain unbalanced. So the unbalanced souls of the Juat arrive, and eventually manage to send Steven overboard, who's subsequently frozen in the sand. But with Steven being taken by the Juat, the scales suddenly balance, and Mark is accepted into the field of reeds. Mark, though, can't bring himself to just leave Steven behind, so he decides to return to the sand where he finds the still frozen Steven, and expresses his gratitude for helping him get through life, claiming he couldn't have survived without him, before also being taken by the Juat. He isn't frozen for long though, as the two are saved by the opening of the Gates of Osiris, which they then walk through to re-enter their body. Throughout this, Layla had found Mark's lifeless body shortly after Harrow shot him and retrieved Amit's Ushapti from his corpse, so she followed after and looked to kill him, until she was stopped by Toedit, who spoke to her through the dead bodies of a group of police officers that had just been judged and killed by Harrow, and told her she must find and break Khonshu's Ushapti if she wants to save Mark. So she traveled to the Chamber of the Gods to do just that, while Harrow and his followers also arrived and killed the Anid Council's avatars, before Harrow then broke Amit's Ushapti to finally release her and be chosen as her avatar, even though she recognizes his scales are unbalanced. Layla, meanwhile, released Khonshu as well, who attempted to manipulate her into being his avatar, but she refused. So he went to confront Amit alone, before suddenly sensing Mark's return to life. So he once again grants him the power of Moon Knight, although this time Mark and Steven have some conditions if he wants their help, and forces him to agree to set them free once Amit is dealt with. They then go to put a stop to her and Harrow, who's now begun judging the souls of the people of Earth, while Layla's found a wounded Sullum, the avatar of Osiris, who just before he dies informs her that, in order to stop Amit, they'll need to imprison her in a mortal form, which they'll need more avatars than they have left to do. So Layla calls out to Toedit, who gleefully agrees to have her as her avatar, and claims her father will be thrilled to learn of this, as the two know each other from his journey to the Field of Reeds. So now, as the Scarlet Scarab, Layla joins Mark and Steven, now working together in unison in fighting against Harrow, while Khonshu battles Amit. Eventually though, Amit and Harrow manage to gain control, but as Harrow goes to kill Mark, Mark suddenly blacks out, and when he awakens, he finds himself kneeled over Harrow's body, about to drive an axe through his skull, much to his and Steven's confusion. Still, they take the beaten Harrow back to the Chamber of the Gods, and recite a spell to bind Amit to his body, which they ultimately succeed in doing. And despite Khonshu's orders to kill Harrow, Mark instead orders Khonshu to do it himself and has him release him and Steven, allowing them to finally live a mostly peaceful life, now equally acknowledging each other's existence. Little do they know though, that Khonshu still has a hold on them, as we see when he breaks Harrow out of the mental hospital he'd been placed in, before revealing that, even though he doesn't know it, Mark Spector still continues to serve him, although as his third personality, Jake Lockley, who seemingly shoots and kills Harrow. Shifting our attention to the multiverse once again, as we follow what appears to be a variant of Doctor Strange and a young girl named America Chavez in a plane between universes called the Gap Junction, as they're attempting to escape a ribboned creature and reach the Book of Ashanti, an ancient book of knowledge and power that gives the sorcerer whatever they need to defeat their enemy, in hopes of killing the creature that's apparently looking to take America's ability of multiversal travel, which she doesn't have any control or understanding of, and is only able to use when she's really afraid, but if she's drained of it, it'll kill her. Just before they can reach the book though, the creature blocks their path, so Strange, after failing to contain it, begins draining America of her power himself, since he'll know how to control it. But he ultimately fails in doing so after being impaled by the creature, and America attempts to take this opportunity to retrieve the Book of Ashanti, but is instead snatched by the beast, and her frightened state results in her creating a portal into another universe, that she then falls into with the help of a dying Strange, who also falls into said portal. But it appears this may have all just been a dream, as our main universe's Doctor Strange wakes up at the same time. Upon awakening, he gets ready for Christine Palmer's wedding, who it turns out had survived the blip, and over the 5 years Strange was gone, had met and fallen in love with another man named Charlie. This fact appears to sadden Strange, but he still shows his support by appearing at the wedding, although he does later approach her to confess his regrets of how things ended up between them. But she believes they wouldn't have worked out anyway, since he always had to be the one holding the knife, as she puts it, and although she respected him for it, she couldn't love him. She claims she's happy with how her life turned out though, and Strange says he is too. Shortly following this interaction, Strange is forced to exit the ceremony after hearing a collision in the distance and noticing chaos in the streets, as an invisible creature wreaks havoc in chase of a young girl. Upon arriving on the scene, Strange removes the creature's invisible cloak and reveals it to be the gigantic tentacled one-eyed monster Gargantos. But the more disturbing revelation for Strange is learning that the young girl the monster's chasing is the same girl from his dream earlier. After killing the beast with the help of Wong, Strange confronts America and questions why she appeared in his dream. And she explains that it wasn't just a dream, but another universe, revealing that all dreams are windows into the lives of our multiversal selves. She then further reveals the context of his dream, but Strange has a hard time believing any of it. So, to prove her claims are true, America takes him and Wong to Defender Strange's corpse, which Strange then discards of, before recalling his dream and realizing that each of the two creatures that attacked her had runes marked on them.
This isn't sorcery, it's witchcraft.
To help gain some understanding of the threat they're facing, Strange meets with Wanda Maximoff and asks what she knows about the multiverse, explaining that he's found a girl that could somehow travel through it, and that she's being pursued by some sort of demon. So Wanda suggests they have America stay with her, claiming she could protect her, but Strange soon realizes he's being deceived, after Wanda calls America by name without him having told her it. So Wanda reveals that it was her who sent the creatures to capture America, with the use of the Darkhold, as she's seeking to absorb her power so she can live in another universe where her sons exist, which had been proven to her within her dreams, and she warns Strange to turn her over by sundown, or else the Scarlet Witch will come to Kamar-Taj. Strange refuses though, so Kamar-Taj fortifies their defenses in preparation for her arrival. But it's still not enough to avoid her attack, and she kills many sorcerers before then dispatching of Strange and Wong and beginning to absorb America's power, whose sphere once again causes a portal to open, that she then escapes through with the help of Strange, sending the two traveling through various dimensions before finally landing in a variant New York. Since America is unable to consciously create a portal that could send them back, Strange suggests they find her variant from this new universe. But she reveals that she has no variants, and instead suggests finding this universe's Doctor Strange. So they travel to the Sanctum, and on their way there, they stumble upon a memory playback establishment called Memory Lane, that plays back one of America's memories, that being the day she last saw her mother's, before they were transported to another universe after America got scared by a bee and unintentionally opened a portal for the first time. She believes they're dead, but Strange gives her hope, claiming that if they're anything like her, then they know how to survive. They eventually do make it to the Sanctum Sanctorum, but only to learn that this variant of Strange had died, sacrificing himself during Earth's battle against Thanos. So they're instead met by the new master of the Sanctum, a variant Baron Karl Mordo, who in the main Marvel universe had dedicated his life to killing Strange, but that doesn't appear to be the case with this variant, as he greets him with a big hug and reveals that his Doctor Strange had always suspected this day would come. Once inside, Strange explains the threat of Wanda's use of the Darkhold, with her having summoned monsters to take America's power for herself. But Mordo reveals that the Darkhold could do much worse than just summon monsters, and that it could allow Wanda to temporarily project her own consciousness into the body of her variant self in what's called dreamwalking. Before they can act on this revelation though, Strange and America fall unconscious, as Mordo had drugged their tea since he believes they're the real threat to his universe, not Wanda Maximoff. Meanwhile, Wanda has already begun the process of dreamwalking and enters the body of her variant self. But while her consciousness is in another universe, a surviving sorcerer named Sarah finds her a captured Wong in the Darkhold, which she then dives on and stabs to destroy, sacrificing herself in the process. This causes Wanda's consciousness to return back to her body, so she turns her attention to Wong, who after she threatens to kill the still surviving sorcerers, tells her that the Darkhold was just a copy, and that the original was transcribed by the demonic entity Chthon on Mount Wundagore, so she forces him to take her there. Meeting back up with a now awakened Strange though, as he finds himself handcuffed and locked inside a cell alongside America, before being met by this universe's Christine, who's revealed to be an expert in multiversal research that began working at this facility following Strange's death in her universe, which she's labeled Earth 838, while our main Marvel universe is labeled Earth 616. She and Strange weren't together here either though, as she explains they never ended up figuring things out, before Strange is then released from his cell by Mordo and an army of variant Ultron sentries to be taken before the Illuminati, a group of powerful individuals made up of Mordo, a Captain Carter variant, a Maria Rambeau variant who went on to become Captain Marvel instead of Carol Danvers, Blackagar Boltagon aka Black Bolt, whose power causes him to release a sonic blast through any utterance from his mouth, Reed Richards aka Mr. Fantastic, who's considered the smartest man alive and has the ability to elongate his body, and Professor X, Charles Xavier, an immensely powerful telepath. Through them, Strange learns that the Illuminati was formed by his variant self to protect their universe, including from threats that can cause an incursion, which, as Richards explains, occurs when the boundary between two universes erodes and they collide, destroying one or both entirely, and which could occur if Strange leaves behind a large enough footprint. So, Strange attempts to plead his case and questions why they believe he's a greater threat than the Scarlet Witch, to which Xavier responds, explaining that during their war against Thanos, Strange had begun dreamwalking with the use of the Darkhold, believing their salvation might lie in the multiverse. And although he'd learned nothing that could lead them to victory, he continued dreamwalking and eventually confessed to causing an incursion that destroyed an entire universe. This led him to renounce the Darkhold's evil and find the Book of Ashanti, which the Illuminati then used together to defeat Thanos, before, as seen in a memory Xavier shows to Strange with the use of his telepathic abilities, the Illuminati had Strange executed by a reluctant and apologetic Black Bolt. Immediately following this revelation, the Illuminati are forced to exit, as they see Wanda has arrived and begun taking out their Ultron bots. Throughout Strange's trip on Earth 838, Wanda and Wong had made it to Mount Wundagore and entered a tomb that was revealed to not only be inscribed with the original Darkhold, but contain a throne for the prophesied Scarlet Witch that the Knights of Wundagore, its monstrous demon guards, kneeled before when Wanda set foot on it, before she then tossed Wong off of the mountain and began the dreamwalking process once again, entering her variant's body and heading over to the Illuminati's headquarters, where she's met by Mr. Fantastic, Captain Carter, Captain Marvel, and Black Bolt. As they tend to the threat of Wanda, Mordo and Professor X stay behind to watch Strange, who it seems Xavier's already made up his mind on, and tells that, if he manages to escape, he must guide America to the Book of Ashanti, which he reveals 838 Strange had built a waypoint to within their headquarters. Mordo still doesn't believe they can trust Strange though, and refuses to release him until the others return, who, upon encountering Wanda, at first attempt to reason with her, but when that doesn't work, they threaten her with Black Bolt's sonic scream, to which she responds by just making his mouth vanish, prompting him to let out a shriek of terror that releases a sonic blast into his own head and kills him. She then follows this by killing Richards, using his ability of elongation against him to turn his body into spaghetti and pop his head like a balloon, before shifting her attention to Captains Carter and Marvel, the former of whom she kills by launching her shield through her torso, while she kills the latter by draining her of her power and crushing her with a statue. She then begins approaching America, still trapped in her cell, but she's once again stopped, this time by Xavier, who uses his telepathic powers to enter her mind and find her alternate self's consciousness, which he tries to pull out from under Wanda's control, but he ultimately fails to do so, and Wanda kills him. His distraction, though, allowed America and Christine to escape, as America realized some of her power and punched her way out of her cell. Meanwhile, Strange, still held captive, recognizes that the remaining members of the Illuminati won't be returning. So, to escape, he fuels the hatred he knows Mordo has for him deep down, and goads him into a fight, during which he manages to use Mordo's offense against him and uncuff himself before running off in search of America, who he quickly meets up with, and the two are then taken by Christine to the doorway of the Gap Junction, where they find the Book of Ashanti. But just as Strange grabs hold of it, Wanda reappears, snatches America, and blasts Strange and the book, destroying it, before then forcing America to open a portal, which she throws Strange and Christine into, before creating another portal to send America back to Earth 616. Strange and Christine, meanwhile, end up in a universe where it appears an incursion took place, so they head to the Sanctum in hopes of finding another Doctor Strange variant that could help them. And once there, Strange enters alone and is met by the variant, who's revealed to actually be guarding the Darkhold, which 616 Strange asks to use to communicate with his universe. But the Strange variant instead asks, "Are you happy, Steven?" Recalling it to be the same question Christine had asked them the day of her wedding, to which they'd answered yes, but knew deep down they were lying. And for this variant, this led him to begin searching through universes for a world where they could be together. But all he found were more Stranges who failed in their pursuit, so he did for them what he considered a favor and killed them. With this revelation, he also reveals his third eye, claiming the Darkhold exacts a heavy toll, before offering Strange a deal in which he'd give him the Darkhold in exchange for his Christine, but Strange refuses. So the two engage in a battle that eventually ends with Strange sending Sinister Strange flying out the Sanctum's window to his death, before then beginning the dreamwalking process himself under the protection of Christine to fight off the souls of the damned while he's under, since he'll not be entering a living variant of himself, but rather the corpse of his Defender Strange variant. The souls of the damned do eventually arrive and attack both the corpse and his physical body for trespassing, but Christine's able to kill those attacking his body with the Brazier of Bone Goliath, while Strange manages to gain control over those attacking the corpse. He then takes out the Knights of Wundagore and saves the still alive Wong, who clung on to the side of the mountain, before sending the souls after Wanda. Wong attempts to keep her trapped with them, but she begins breaking free, so believing there's no other way, he tells Strange to take America's power. But Strange believes America can control it, since every time she's opened a portal, she'd sent them exactly where they needed to go. So, once Wanda breaks free and takes him and Wong out, America flies in with a huge flurry of strikes that nearly send Wanda falling into another universe to her death. But Wanda gains control once again, so America instead opens a portal back to Earth 838, where Wanda's forced to confront her variant self and her sons. And after recognizing the fear in her children's eyes, Wanda finally accepts defeat, being comforted by her variant self. She then allows America and Wong to leave and promises no one will ever be tempted by the Darkhold again, before destroying it in every universe along with her tomb, which she's presumably crushed underneath. Strange then returns to his body and informs Christine that it's over, before confessing that he loves her in every universe, but has always let his fear get in the way of that. So she tells him to face his fears, just as America arrives to send them back to their respective universes. Sometime later, we see Wong and Strange looking over a training session that America's taking part in at Kamertage. And once back in the New York Sanctum, Strange goes back to life as it was, now appearing much happier. But one day, he suddenly falls over in an extreme amount of pain and shouts as a third eye appears on his forehead. Then, sometime after this, a recovered Strange is approached by a woman named Clea, who claims he'd caused an incursion and that he now must help fix it, before opening a portal to what appears to be the Dark Dimension, which the two then jump into. Shifting away from multiversal adventures once again now, as we meet 16-year-old Kamala Khan, a Captain Marvel superfan who she plans on cosplaying at the inaugural AvengerCon. Unfortunately for her though, her parents won't allow her to attend the event, so she decides she's just gonna have to sneak out with the help of her best friend, Bruno Corelli, who's also a really good inventor and who creates a device that'll play a recording of Kamala whenever someone knocks on her door while she's gone. With their plan formed and ready, she looks to put the finishing touches on her Captain Marvel outfit, and decides to wear along with it this unique bangle she'd found amongst some of her grandmother's old things, which she puts on for the first time once at the convention. But upon putting it on, she feels a sudden surge of energy before briefly being transported to a purple-tinted realm. Although in a state of shock and confusion, she still heads up on stage to take part in the Captain Marvel costume contest, which we see one of her classmates, Zoe, who apparently has over 80,000 followers on social media, is also taking part in. But all the flashing lights and cameras overwhelm Kamala, and she suddenly begins shooting energy constructs from her hand, one of which hits a giant Ant-Man statue, resulting in further destruction, and Zoe nearly being injured after getting hit by a giant Mjolnir prop. But Kamala manages to brace her fall with a hand-shaped energy construct before fleeing the scene. Once she returns home though, she's met in her room by her mother, who's greatly disappointed in the woman she's becoming and tells her to stop obsessing over her fantasies. But Kamala no longer needs to fantasize about Captain Marvel and her cosmic powers, since she's stumbled upon some of her own. which she begins learning to control the following day with Bruno. Also, during school, she overhears that Zoe's throwing a party in celebration of all the new followers she'd gotten from her encounter with a superhero who she's nicknamed Nightlight. And after learning her crush Kamran will be attending, Kamala convinces Bruno and her other best friend, Nakia, to go with her as well. Once at the party, she eventually encounters Kamran, but shortly after, cops arrive to shut it down. So he offers her and her friends a ride home, and while driving, he and Kamala get to talking a bit, which makes Bruno visibly jealous, and even more so after seeing they've made plans to hang out the following day after school. Following their hangout, which goes very well, Kamala has dinner with her family and her brother Amir's fiancée Taisha, to whom they tell a story they'd heard from Kamala's grandmother on her mother's side, Sana, about her family during the partition of India back in the 1940s, explaining that, while on their way to the last train out of the city, Sana, who was just a toddler at the time, got separated by her parents. But just before the train left the station, Sana claims that she managed to find her father by following a trail of stars, although her mother unfortunately disappeared that night. Just as her father finishes retelling the story, Kamala begins to once again feel a sudden surge of energy from the bangle, which displays another vision of a bright light as well as the sound of a train. So Kamala, in an attempt to understand this vision, calls up her grandmother and asks about the bangle, which she reveals belonged to her mother, Aisha, but refuses to talk any more about it since she knows it would make Kamala's mother upset, as she's always disliked Sana's crazy stories. So, while out celebrating Eid with her family, Kamala speaks with whom she's nicknamed the Illuminatis, in hopes of learning more about Aisha and the bangle. But before she can really learn anything, a young boy suddenly falls while taking photos out of a window. So Kamala suits up in her Captain Marvel outfit and uses her cosmic abilities to save him. Although as she does, she sees another vision created by the bangle of an unknown woman reaching out to her, before she's then chased by agents of the Department of Damage Control and their Stark Industries drones. She's able to avoid them though, and ultimately escapes with the help of Kamran driving by, who then introduces her to his mother, Najma, who turns out to be the woman she just saw in her vision. Najma reveals that she and Kamala's great-grandmother were both part of a group called the Clandestines from the Noor Dimension, who were exiled to Earth centuries ago. And during that time, the group got separated and lost contact with Aisha, who was also the last in possession of the bangle that they claim could send them back home. So for years, they believed their chances of going home were lost, until they were once again able to sense the bangle's presence when Kamala first put it on. So they now ask her for help in returning them to their dimension, and she agrees, before then meeting back up with Bruno to ask for his help. But the more he looks into it, the more reasons he finds not to do it, believing it could result in mass destruction if not done right. So Kamala informs Kamran that she'll need more time. She then for now shifts her focus to her brother's wedding, which goes off without a hitch until Kamran shows up to inform Kamala that his mother and the Clandestines refuse to wait any longer and are coming to take the bangle by force. So she gets everyone out of the building by turning on the fire alarm and attempts to fight off the 4 superhuman beings with the help of Kamran and Bruno, although the former is eventually incapacitated, leaving her and Bruno surrounded. But before they can attack any further, a unit of DODC officers barge in, giving the two an opening to escape while the Clandestines are arrested. As they escape though, they're seen by Nakia, who's furious that Kamala didn't tell her she was Nightlight, but waits for another time to talk while Kamala rushes home. And once home, she receives a call from her grandmother, who tells her she must come see her, as she also had a vision of the train. So Kamala and her mother book a flight to Karachi, Pakistan, to see her grandmother for the first time in years. And once there, she learns that the train from their vision was the same one her grandmother had gotten on during the partition, which prompts Kamala to head over to the train station in hopes of learning more. But while searching, she's suddenly attacked by a young man named Kareem, claiming he'd sensed the presence of the Noor. But he quickly realizes she's not a clandestine, so he takes her to meet his mentor, Walid, the leader of the Red Daggers, a group which functions to protect people from threats of the unseen, such as the Noor Dimension, which he explains is connected to their world behind the Veil of Noor, but could be unleashed with the use of the bangle, although it would destroy their world entirely. So Walid teaches her to control her powers to protect the bangle as well as herself, but as they do that, they're suddenly attacked by the Clandestines, who throughout this had managed to escape the DODC's Supermax prison along with Kamran, although following their escape, Najma chose to leave him behind. During their attack, Najma manages to kill Walid, before then attempting to kill Kamala as well, but she uses the bangle to block the blow. And the knife's contact with the bangle then suddenly transports Kamala back to the partition in 1947. To understand how this has happened, we first must go back to 1942, as we see Aisha not too long after she'd been separated from the other clandestines, now in a village in India, and there she encounters a man named Hassan, who, recognizing she has no home, offers to let her stay in his cottage, resulting in the beginning of a romantic relationship between the two that continues to grow over the next several years, with them eventually giving birth to their daughter, Sana. In 1947 though, Najma finally manages to track Aisha down, and demands she return the bangle to them so they can all return home the following day at sundown. But Aisha, aware of the dangers that'll come with opening the Veil of Noor, and having started a family here, no longer wants to leave. So she rushes Hassan and Sana, the latter of whom she has hold on to the bangle, to the train station, where she finally reveals the truth of who she is to Hassan, and urges him to make sure Sana gets on the train no matter what happens, before she's then forced to separate from them after noticing Najma following after her. And upon confronting her, Najma stabs her in the abdomen and leaves her bleeding to death for betraying them, while Hassan, throughout this, has lost sight of Sana. So a dying Aisha turns to the bangle for help and calls for it to bring Sana back in time, but it instead brings back Kamala. So Aisha asks her to lead Sana back to her father, and so she does with a trail of stars, before them being transported back to the present, where we see the blow to the bangle has also opened the Veil of Noor. But as the clandestines attempt to pass through it, their bodies are suddenly turned into black crystalline rock, which then crumbles. Still, Najma believes she can make it through, but is made hesitant by Kamala, who urges her to instead help close it so as to not leave Kamran behind, and Najma agrees. Although, the only way to close it is to sacrifice herself, so she does, while also transferring her Noor light to Kamran. Just as the veil closes, Kamala's mother and grandmother arrive, having found her by tracking her phone's location, and learn that Kamala is the Light Girl. Meanwhile, back in Jersey City, Bruno is met at his convenience store, Circle Q, by Kamran, who, having nowhere else to go, asks for his help. But shortly after his arrival, a DODC drone shows up and destroys Circle Q. Kamala quickly learns about this upon returning home, so she, now fitted in a new superhero suit made by her mother, heads out to find him and Bruno. And once she does, they make their way over to and hide in their high school. There, they also meet up with Nakia, who Kamala apologizes to for not telling her about her superpowers, before the group, which is soon joined by Zoe, who had been filming TikToks in the school's theater, as well as Kamala's brother Amir, sent by their mother to keep an eye on her, are forced to form a plan to distract and stall the DODC until they're able to get Kamran to the harbor, where she was told to take him by Kareem, who'd agreed on the phone earlier to help get him out of town. As they do that, we see that one of the DODC's head agents, Agent Cleary, isn't too happy with how the case's leading agent, Sadie Deaver, has been handling things, specifically with the fact that they're planning an attack outside of a high school. So he orders her to evacuate, but she decides to instead have her men move in. Once inside though, their attempts to apprehend Kamran and Kamala are thwarted by the other kids, who do a good job of distracting them before ultimately being arrested. As soon as the two make it outside though, they're sent flying by a blast from the DODC's Stark Sonic Cannon. So Kamala, in an attempt to protect herself and a momentarily incapacitated Kamran, embiggens for the first time, transferring hard light along her arms and legs to elongate them, and allowing her to destroy the cannon and easily take out the remaining officers, while Kamran regains consciousness. A furious Kamran then begins unleashing his Noor light on the earth, still reeling from his mother leaving him behind, as well as her apparent death. But his attack is stopped by Kamala, as she reveals that his mother sacrificed herself to save him and this world, before then punching a hole through the ground for him to escape. She then escapes as well by walking on hard light above the unit of DODC officers, including Agent Deaver, who subsequently fired for going against Cleary's orders. Now back at home, Kamala's met by her father, who praises her for her heroic efforts and also gives her a new superhero name, revealing that Kamal actually means Marvel in Urdu, so he calls her his Little Miss Marvel. We then jump ahead 1 week later as Kamala and Nakia are saying their goodbyes to Bruno, who's heading off to California to attend the California Institute of Technology. But just before he leaves, he reveals that he'd taken a look into Kamala's genetic makeup and realized that her genes are different from those of her family, with her being the only one with any actual supernatural ability, even prior to her gaining these powers. And he reveals that she's actually a mutant. Sometime after this, things continue to get weirder for Kamala, as her bangle oddly begins glowing, before she's then suddenly teleported elsewhere, trading places with Captain Marvel. Speaking of superheroes that primarily work to protect the galaxy, we meet back up with the Guardians of the Galaxy and Thor, the latter of whom, since leaving Earth, has gotten back into godly shape, and the group is now seen helping the planet Indigar fight off a species of raiders called the Buskan, who'd arrived to take claim of the Indigarian sacred temple since it's no longer under the protection of their gods, as they'd recently been murdered. So Thor eventually leads them to victory, but in doing so, he ends up destroying the temple anyway, resulting in King Yakan gifting him 2 very loud screaming goats. The team, along with the goats, then head onto the Benatar, inside of which they view a large number of distress calls that have emerged throughout the galaxy, as a number of gods have been murdered by a man labeled the God Butcher, whose origin we learned of earlier as we were introduced to a man named Gore and his daughter Love, although she soon died in his arms from starvation. And after burying her body beneath the sand, he began hearing a voice call out to him in the distance. So he followed it and discovered an oasis, where he was met by his worshipped god Rapu, who's revealed to have just killed the latest wielder of the Necro Sword, an ancient weapon that corrupts and absorbs the life force of its wielder, whilst giving them the ability to slay gods. Gore believed he'd been brought before Rapu so he could fulfill the promise of an eternal reward, but Rapu instead mocked and laughed at him, while revealing there never was one, prompting a betrayed Gore to renounce his god. So Rapu began strangling him to death, until the Necro Sword suddenly called to and cursed Gore, allowing him to stab Rapu in the neck. And with this newfound power, he vowed that all gods will die, leading him to become Gore the God Butcher, killing gods across the galaxy. And we see that he, at some point, had encountered Thor's close friend Lady Sif, who had also sent a distress call asking for Thor's help. So, with so many in danger, the team decides to split up, saddening Thor, but he's comforted by Star-Lord before the Guardians depart on their ship, leaving Thor and Korg to find Sif on the galactic frontier, formerly ruled by the now-deceased god Falagar the Behemoth. There, they find Sif defeated with a severed arm, and she warns them that the God Butcher is headed to New Asgard next, which is proven to be true, as Gore sends shadow monsters to capture the town's children, leading to a battle between the monsters and Asgard's army, who are then joined by a returning Thor. But he's quickly distracted by what appears to be the sound of his previously destroyed weapon, Mjolnir, so he attempts to summon it towards him, but to his surprise, it springs back to the hands of Jane Foster, who he hadn't seen since their breakup 9 years ago, which we learn was the result of them growing distant as he spent more time on duty as a superhero, and she continued to become a more accomplished astrophysicist. Recently though, we saw that Jane had been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, and although she began undergoing treatment, her likelihood of recovery was low. But she soon gained new hope after feeling Mjolnir calling for her, so she traveled to New Asgard where the dismembered Mjolnir was left as a tourist attraction. When Mjolnir was still whole and Thor and Jane were still together, Thor, as Jane was sleeping one night, had Mjolnir promise to always take care of her, which unknowingly left an enchantment. So now, Mjolnir has fulfilled that promise and reformed to give Jane the power of the mighty Thor. Before Thor can try to understand any of this, Gore arrives and the two engage in a short brawl, until Thor overpowers him, so Gore retreats with the captured children, one of which happened to be the deceased Heimdall's son, Axel, who shares his father's all-seeing powers that he uses to contact Thor and bring a vision ghost of him inside the mouth of the shadow monster, where he and the kids are currently trapped. There, Thor realizes that they're being taken to the Shadow Realm, where Gore will be at the peak of his powers, so he, Korg, Valkyrie, and Jane begin a journey to Omnipotent City, home to the most respected and famous gods, overseen by the Olympian king of gods, Zeus, in hopes of gaining their help in battle. Once there, after disguising themselves as emotion gods, they make their way into the Godheads meeting hosted by Zeus, who Thor eventually approaches on stage and asks for his help in raising an army against Gore. But Zeus, even after learning Gore's kidnapped Asgardian children, refuses to help, as he believes he's already perfectly safe in Omnipotent City, and isn't worried that Gore will reach his planned destination of Eternity, one of the cosmic entities at the center of the universe that's said to grant the desire of the first person to reach it, since he doesn't have the key. Thor's taken aback by this response and questions Zeus's integrity, eventually leading to a battle between the heroes and his guards, that Zeus also soon joins in on, launching his lightning rod Thunderbolt into Korg's body, which appears to kill him, before then launching it at Thor, but Thor manages to catch it and launch it back at Zeus, impaling him through the chest. It turns out, though, that Korg had survived the attack, since the only part of a Cronin needed to survive is its face, which Thor then grabs while Valkyrie steals Thunderbolt as the four make their escape and journey to the Shadow Realm alone. During their trip, Thor finally addresses his feelings for Jane and confesses that he's still in love with her, but in response, she reveals that she has cancer, The heartbreaking news doesn't stop Thor from pushing for love though, as he doesn't want to allow his fear of losing love stop him from experiencing it any longer. So the two share a kiss and promise to spend whatever time she has left together. The group then finally enters the Shadow Realm, only to find that the children aren't there, and they quickly realize they've been led into a trap upon discovering writings that reveal the Bifrost and in turn Stormbreaker are the key to eternity. They soon end up in a battle with Gore and his shadow monsters, but as the battle wears on, Jane begins to wear down, and with her weakened and Thor distracted with the shadow monsters, Valkyrie is left open to a stab through the abdomen by Gore. So they attempt to exit through the Bifrost, but just as they begin traveling through it, Gore is able to grab hold of Stormbreaker and pry it from Thor's hands, leaving them to crash land on New Asgard, where Jane, now in her mortal state, promptly falls unconscious. And after taking the two to the hospital, Thor's informed that Mjolnir has actually been draining Jane's life force every time she uses it, making her unable to fight off the cancer. So he tells her to stay here and rest, while he goes to save the children on his own, believing that if there's any chance for her to live, then she has to take it, as it could be their last chance to be together. And although she wants to continue fighting, she agrees to stay behind. So he takes Zeus's Thunderbolt and uses it to instantaneously travel to the center of the universe, where Gore's already begun using Stormbreaker to open Eternity's gate. Also there are the Asgardian children, who Thor promptly releases from captivity before realizing they could actually help him in his impending battle. So he uses Zeus's Thunderbolt to grant them, for a limited time only, the power of Thor, allowing him to shift his attention to Gore while the children fight off the shadow monsters. Gore continues to get the better of him though, and looks like he's actually about to kill him, but fortunately he's knocked away in the nick of time by Mjolnir, launched by a returning Jane, who had sensed her lover's distress, so she decided to wield Mjolnir one last time, and together the two are able to overpower Gore and destroy the Necrosword, ridding him of his powers, while also recovering Stormbreaker, which Thor then tosses to Axel so he and the kids can return home. But it appears it's too late, as Gore had already managed to open Eternity's gate and has begun approaching the entity, prepared to make his wish that will eradicate the gods. Thor at first attempts to plead for him not to, but soon just accepts defeat and goes to spend his last moments with Jane. Although he does express hope that Gore will choose love as he has, and instead wish his daughter back to life. But a dying Gore claims she'll be left alone and without a father, to which Jane assures him she won't be, knowing Thor will look after her. So he uses his one wish to bring her back to life, and gets to share one more moment with her before being overcome by the sword's curse. Jane's time's almost up as well, so she and Thor share I love yous, which prove to be her final words, as she passes following their final kiss goodbye. We see later though that death was not yet the end for her, as she enters the gates of Valhalla and is welcomed by Heimdall into the afterlife. On Earth sometime later, we see that New Asgard has built a statue in her memory, while the kids have now been put into combat training under Sif and Valkyrie, and Korg is fully regenerated and appears to have fallen in love with a fellow Cronin named Dwayne. Also in this time, Thor has begun raising Gore's daughter as his own, traveling with her throughout the galaxy, wielding Mjolnir and Stormbreaker respectively, to offer assistance to whomever needs it, all the while becoming known as Love and Thunder. Back on Omnipotent City though, we see that Zeus had actually survived Thor's attack, and is furious with how superheroes have diminished the perception of the gods. So he sends his son Hercules to kill Thor, and remind the galaxy that gods are meant to be feared. Moving on to another founding member of the Avengers though, as we're introduced to the Hulk, Bruce Banner's cousin, lawyer Jennifer Walters, as she informs us, the audience, of how she became a Hulk herself, bringing us to a flashback from a few months ago in which she and Bruce, whose arm injury from wielding the 6 Infinity Stones has begun to heal thanks to a device he made that keeps him in his human form, are out on a drive before getting interrupted by a Sakaran spaceship suddenly appearing in front of them, which forces Jen to swerve off the road and over a cliff. Although injured, she manages to pull herself and Bruce out of the damaged vehicle, but while doing so, she gets some of his blood in her open wound, which transforms her into a Hulk and causes her to black out. When she eventually awakens, she finds herself on Bruce's private island in Mexico, given to him by Tony Stark. And there, he explains what happened and prepares her for a multi-year journey of coming to terms with being a Hulk, beginning with an experiment to track her tolerance when being put in a distressed emotional state. But once transformed, they quickly realize that Jen doesn't have an alter ego as Bruce once did, and is just half Jen, half Hulk, all in one form. So Jen suggests that she just skips all the Hulk training and returns to her life, since she doesn't want to be a superhero anyway. And Bruce in turn warns her that denying half of her being is no way to live, but she's adamant about leaving and even runs him over to do so, resulting in a huge Hulk battle. They eventually make amends though, and she ultimately makes her way back to LA, where she's now prosecuting against prestigious law firm GLK&H. Once in court though, just before she can give her closing argument, the superpowered social media influencer Titania comes crashing in the midst of her fleeing her own trial for a traffic summons. So to protect the civilians within the courtroom, Jen transforms into her Hulk form and takes Titania out. The news of this incident quickly gets out to the public, who give her the nickname She-Hulk. But although she's now perceived as a hero by the people, her boss is not as pleased with the turn of events, since her actions led to the case being declared a mistrial. And that, paired with her newfound fame, forces him to fire her. She soon manages to find a new job though, with GLK&H, as they've just started up their own superhuman law division and want the She-Hulk to be at the forefront of it, which she's not too thrilled about, but still accepts since she has nowhere else to turn. Things quickly become conflicting though, as she's assigned the parole of Emil Blonsky, aka the Abomination, as her first case. But Emil's no longer just in his Abomination form, as over the years, he's learned to control his transformations and now chooses to just be Emil. So Jen ultimately decides to take the case, but her planned strategy for it is promptly thrown out the window as footage has surfaced of the Abomination's battle with Wong from earlier. So she, with the help of her best friend and paralegal Nikki, decides to send a message to the sorcerer, who arrives not too long after and explains the context of the situation, revealing that he had required a worthy opponent as part of his training to become Sorcerer Supreme. So he extracted the Abomination from his cell against his will, but afterwards, Emil himself chose to return and carry out his sentence. Having explained the facts to Jen, Wong is then asked to do the same at Emil's hearing to the parole board, which he does, and this works in convincing the board that Emil has been rehabilitated. But they're still worried about his uncontrollable transformations into the Abomination. So, to put their minds at ease, he intentionally transforms and proves he's in complete control, as the Abomination is now half Emil, half Abomination. So the board decides to release Blonsky on parole, on the condition that he no longer transforms into his alter ego. Following this, Jen shifts her attention to her new online dating profile, which she struggles to find any good matches on. So Nikki pushes her to instead create an account as She-Hulk. And although Jen hates the idea at first, she soon comes around and ends up doing it anyway, resulting in a ton of matches, a few of whom she goes to meet that night, before eventually bringing one of them, named Arthur, home with her and getting it on. The next morning though, she quickly learns that Arthur had no interest in her outside of her She-Hulk form, as upon seeing her as just Jen, he rushes out the house. Throughout this going on with Jen, Nikki's begun looking for new clothes for Jen to wear other than men's suits, and learns that their colleague, nicknamed Pug, knows a guy who knows another guy that actually works as a superhero outfit designer. So they make an appointment for Jen to meet with the man himself, Luke Jacobson, who's intrigued by the prospect of creating a suit for a Hulk, so he agrees to make one for her. And now, with clothes that actually fit her, Jen gets ready to attend her old high school friend Lulu's wedding as She-Hulk. But upon her arrival, Lulu appears not too pleased with her being there in her Hulk form, and asks her to attend the wedding as just Jen, to which she agrees. She soon learns though that Titania is also attending the wedding, having been invited by a friend of the groom who she's apparently dating, but Jen knows she's just here to mess with her. As she tries to cool off, she's approached by another friend of the groom named Josh, who awkwardly attempts to hit on her, but their encounter is cut short after Lulu calls him away, and asks Jen to basically act as one of the caterers. So, with the night not going as she'd hoped, Jen gets drunk, and while drunk, she once again is able to talk to Josh, who she vents to about the perception of She-Hulk compared to just Jen, and he comforts her, letting her know how great she is. She's soon forced to cut their conversation short again though, to go throw up, and after doing that, she's suddenly attacked by Titania, who urges her to transform into She-Hulk, and so she does, leading to a back and forth brawl that ends with Titania's dental veneers being knocked loose from her mouth, prompting her to run off. Following this satisfying victory, Jen goes back to talking with Josh, and the two seem to really hit it off. So they continue to go on multiple dates over the next few days, eventually leading to them getting it on at Jen's place. But, although things seem to have gone well, the next morning she wakes up with Josh nowhere to be found, and he continues to ghost her for several days after the fact, with the only phone call she receives being from Emil Blonsky's parole officer, Chuck, hoping she'd join him in meeting with Emil at his home, as there was recently a malfunction with his inhibitor that he needs to check out. So she makes her way over, but everything seems fine and she prepares to return home, until her car is suddenly wrecked by two members of Blonsky's self-healing support group, Elagula and Manbull, as they come barreling out of the woods in the midst of a brawl. So, with her stuck here for the rest of the day, Emil invites her to take part in a meeting for his support group, during which we're introduced to its other members, Saracen, Porcupine, and Dirk Garthwaite. And once joining the meeting, she explains the whole Josh situation, as well as her struggles with how almost everyone seems to prefer She-Hulk over Jen. So the group has her transform back into Jen, and shows their appreciation for her, and their support brings an end to her worrying about Josh. Following this breakthrough, the tow truck finally arrives to take her home. And while she travels, we're taken to a flashback from that last night with Josh, in which he's seen copying her phone's data while she's sleeping, and texting an unidentified person that goes by the name Hulk King that he's gotten some of her blood. Before we dive deeper into who Hulk King is and why they want Jennifer's blood, we're first introduced to Eugene Patilio Jr., another so-called superhero who goes by the name Leapfrog, and who's come to Jen hoping she can help him receive compensation for his defective supersuit sold to him by Luke Jacobson that resulted in him getting third-degree burns along his legs while he attempted to fly off in it. Jen really doesn't want to work this case since it would most likely result in her no longer having Jacobson as a tailor, but she's forced to by her boss since Eugene's father is a very important client. So she meets with Jacobson in court, whose attorney we see is actually Peter Parker's lawyer from earlier, Matt Murdock, who swiftly gets Jen's motion to compel production of Jacobson's client list denied, as superheroes haven't been under the control and regulations of the government since the Sokovia Accords were repealed, before then getting the case dismissed altogether after recognizing, seemingly through smell, that Eugene had used jet fuel on his suit's boosters, which is exactly what Jacobson told him not to do. Frustrated, Jen heads over to the bar later that night where she's met by Matt, who she shares a bit of back and forth banter and really seems to get along with. But just as they really start talking, he receives a phone call and is forced to exit. And she's then forced to leave as well, after receiving a message from one of her dates from earlier, Todd, who we saw is also a top GLK&H client, about some sort of legal emergency. Although it turns out that's not the actual reason he asked to meet with her, as he still believes there's a connection between them, so she harshly turns him down. Following this, she receives a call from Eugene, who's currently being chased by an unknown assailant. So she suits up for the first time in her tailored supersuit and thwarts the man's attack. The attacker manages to avoid most of her offense though, and continues chasing Eugene. So she uses a thunderclap to take him down, allowing her to remove his mask and reveal him to be Matt Murdock, who explains that, although he is actually blind, his other senses are extremely enhanced, allowing him to be a lawyer by day and the masked vigilante daredevil by night. And the reason he's chasing after Leapfrog is because he's actually kidnapped Jacobson and is forcing him to make him a new suit. Upon learning this, Jen decides to work alongside him to take Leapfrog and his goons down en route to releasing Jacobson, and for her part in saving him, he agrees to continue being her tailor. Having resolved the issue, she and Matt continue subtly flirting with one another, with him even offering to take her out to dinner the next time he's in town. But she suggests they just skip that part, so they head back to her place and get it on before he heads back to New York the next morning. Following his exit, she and Nikki get ready for and later attend the gala in celebration of female lawyers. But during the event, a video created by Hulk King and his followers from the Intelligentsia website begins to play, and in it is footage of Jen and Josh having sex, prompting her to destroy the projector, which in turn results in further destruction to the building, and she's soon surrounded by police. As a result of this incident, Jen's forced to wear an inhibitor and is no longer allowed to transform into She-Hulk, which in turn results in her losing her job. And with no job, she's unable to pay rent, so she has to move back in with her parents. With life continuing to screw her over, and with her no closer to finding the people behind Intelligentsia, she decides to head over to Emil's home, seeking help for her mental health, while Nikki continues to look into Intelligentsia and the Hulk King, and learns that he's hosting a private event that night, which she asks Pug to attend undercover, and he agrees. Once inside, he discovers that Hulk King is actually Todd, who for the event has hired the Abomination, who's also allowed them to hold the event in his lodge as their guest speaker, although he doesn't know what the purpose of their meeting is and just believes he's there to be their life coach. Midway through his speech though, Jen arrives and is informed by Pug and Nikki that Todd is Hulk King, before Todd then also reveals that he synthesized her blood into a serum that he then injects into his body, transforming him into a Hulk as well. He then goes to attack Jen, but is thwarted by Abomination before they're then joined by Titania, who suddenly comes crashing into the lodge, and her arrival is then followed by Bruce Banner's return, who throughout all this had been off-world on Sakaar. And upon his return, he begins to brawl with Abomination over a misunderstanding. This huge clash and overlapping storylines really confuse Jen, and she expresses this confusion to the audience until she's interrupted by the Disney Plus menu screen. So she climbs out of her show and into the Marvel Assembled series to confront the She-Hulk writing team about their horrible finale. But they claim that this is the finale their boss Kevin wants, so she goes to talk to him instead, and upon meeting Kevin, she learns that he's actually just a robot that stands for Knowledge Enhanced Visual Interconnectivity Nexus, which she still tries to convince to change up her finale, not wanting it to end like every other Marvel project, and the AI agrees. So they remove Todd gaining Hulk powers, as well as Bruce's sudden return, and Emil is forced to hold himself accountable for his actions. Jen also requests they bring back Daredevil just because she misses him, and Kevin once again agrees. So when she returns to the show, she's again permitted to transform into She-Hulk and regains her position at GLK&H, from which she'll be taking the case against the now arrested Todd, while Emil turns himself in and Daredevil suddenly arrives to later join her at her family's barbecue, during which Bruce once again returns, now along with his son, Scar. Meanwhile, Emil, now imprisoned once again, is soon met in his cell by Wong, who he plans on staying with in Kamar-Taj. Moving on now to another supernatural being's introduction, as we're taken to the funeral of Ulysses Bloodstone, the head of the Bloodstone family and most recent owner of the powerful supernatural relic, the Bloodstone, described as a weapon unlike any other. For generations, the relic had been controlled and passed down by the family, known for being adept monster hunters. But now, with Ulysses passing, a new owner of the relic is to be decided, as various hunters, including the likes of Joshua Jovan, Barrasso, Azarel, Liorn, and Jack Russell, have arrived to take part in a ceremonial hunt, with the winner becoming the next to wield the gem and the new leader of the monster hunting cabal. Also joining the hunters is Ulysses' estranged daughter, Elsa, who her stepmother Verussa explains was believed to have the potential to one day surpass her father as a monster hunter, but instead decided to leave her family, not a fan of their business. She's now returned, though, to gain possession of the Bloodstone, with her being the next in line in her family to wield it. But due to her decades of absence, she must take part in the hunt to earn possession of it. So the hunt begins, with the gem affixed to the monster's body. And soon, Jack and Elsa suddenly stumble upon one another, which would normally result in the two hunters battling. But Jack suggests they just pass each other by. Before they can do anything, though, Jovan appears and swings an axe at Jack's head, who's luckily tossed out of the way by Elsa, who manages to fight him off and steal his axe before running off. As she continues on with her search, she's soon once again attacked, this time by Liorn with the use of a crossbow gauntlet. But she manages to thwart his attack and slice his arm off with the axe. He proves to still be a worthy opponent, though, as he comes bursting through the door before gaining possession of the axe himself and slicing open her thigh. But she's able to take him out with the crossbow gauntlet, still connected to his severed arm, landing a shot through his throat. Meanwhile, Jack becomes the first to come across the monster, while hiding against some bushes that the creature suddenly reaches out of and grabs onto him through. But it turns out, Jack actually knows the creature, revealed to be the Man-Thing, formerly known as Ted Sallis prior to somehow undergoing this transformation, and who Jack has arrived to help escape, planning on using this small explosive to break them out. But as the two are talking, Jack is seen by Azarel, who promptly chases after him and forces him to run and hide. But in doing so, he locks himself inside the Bloodstone's family burial chamber, along with Elsa, who'd already been in there to cover up her wound, which Jack helps put a tourniquet over. Believing her to be trustworthy, Jack suggests they help each other out, revealing he's friends with the monster and offering to help her get the Bloodstone if she aids him in the monster's escape, to which she ultimately agrees. So the two exit the chamber, but immediately after they do, Jack accidentally turns on the bomb, forcing the two to rush their plan. Meanwhile, Jovan looks close to approaching the creature, but luckily, Elsa appears just in time to prevent his attack, and he's instead killed by Ted, who melts his body with acid that comes spewing from his hand as he grabs hold of his skull. Elsa, though, is quickly able to gain his trust after calling him by his name, and informs him that Jack is waiting for him, who throughout this has managed to make it to and blow open the nearest perimeter wall, and after Elsa removes the stone from his body, Ted successfully escapes the temple. With her having done her part of the deal, Jack looks to follow through with his, and reaches down to grab the Bloodstone. But as he touches it, it launches him back with a sudden blast. Just then, Verussa and a few guards arrive, and the former reveals that the Bloodstone's reaction was triggered by Jack being a monster himself. So the guards knock him out, as well as Elsa for helping him, and when he wakes, he's locked in a cell alongside her. Upon awakening, he apologizes for deceiving her and attempts to ease her fear, explaining that he only transforms into the monster once a month, every full moon, and that there isn't another one for 5 days. But that doesn't seem to matter tonight, as she reveals that the Bloodstone can transform him in 5 seconds. Verussa, the remaining hunters, and a few guards then slowly begin entering the room, so Jack quickly informs Elsa that, once he transforms, to not break eye contact with him no matter what, and he profusely sniffs her in hopes of remembering her following his transformation, which he claims has worked before, though only once. Verussa then begins citing a Latin spell before aiming and firing the stone at Jack, which slowly forces him to transform into a werewolf that quickly breaks out of its cell and begins killing multiple guards. Elsa, meanwhile, also escapes the cage and engages in a sword fight with Barrasso, which she quickly wins after tripping him onto her sword and slashing his throat. Azrael then appears and attacks Elsa as well, but she's ultimately killed with her throat also being slashed before having the sword slammed down into her head. Throughout Elsa's brawl with the hunters, the werewolf continued its merciless attack on the guards, tearing through and killing them one by one, before shifting its attention to Verussa. But each attempt he makes at tackling her, she sends him flying back with the Bloodstone. And it soon looks like she may even kill him, but she's prevented from doing so by Elsa, who grabs hold of her with a metal hook and sends her flying back, knocking her out momentarily. Elsa then grabs hold of the Bloodstone before slowly approaching the monster, which suddenly leaps onto and tackles her to the ground, though it chooses not to harm her and instead just runs out of the temple. Following his escape, Verussa regains consciousness, furious that Elsa let him go, and prepares to kill her. But she's suddenly stopped by a returning Man-Thing, who comes crashing through the ceiling and incinerates her body with acid, before being pointed in the direction of Jack by Elsa. And we later meet back up with him and Jack, with the latter awakening in his human form as Ted sits listening to Over the Rainbow playing on a phonograph, and assures Jack that Elsa wasn't harmed during his rampage. Returning for the first time now to the Kingdom of Wakanda, although unfortunately not under the best of circumstances, as King T'Challa has caught a deadly illness, and although Shuri attempts to replicate the previously destroyed heart-shaped herb to save him, she's ultimately unable to do so and he passes away. 1 year following his death, Queen Ramonda is called to meet with the United Nations in Switzerland, who expressed their disappointment in Wakanda's failure to share resources such as vibranium. But Ramonda claims that it's always been their policy to never trade vibranium, aware that others may have evil intentions upon gaining that kind of power. And this has already been proven to her, as recently, soldiers of the French military attacked a Wakandan outreach center in Asongo, Mali, in an attempt to steal vibranium weapons, but were ultimately subdued. So she reminds the countries that, even without their Black Panther, Wakanda is still more than capable of protecting itself. Meanwhile, at a mining outpost in the Atlantic Ocean, Americans are seen searching for vibranium with the use of their recently built and only vibranium detector, which soon leads them to some of the rare metal. But as they go to collect it, beings from within the ocean begin singing an hypnotic tune that prompts the US soldiers on the boat to jump into the water, before the beings then climb onto the boat themselves and attack the remaining Americans, some of whom nearly escape via helicopter, but they're ultimately sent crashing into the ocean by the ruler of the underwater kingdom of Talokan, Namor, also known by his people as Kukulkan, who, following this attack, confronts Queen Ramonda and Shuri in Wakanda, to whom he explains his encounter with the Americans and asks for their help in protecting his kingdom and its supply of vibranium from being discovered, since it was their decision to reveal Wakanda and its resources to the rest of the world that has now compromised Talokan's hidden civilization. And he specifically wants them to bring him the scientists that created the Americans' vibranium detector and threatens to unleash his army of unparalleled strength if they choose to side against him. Before coming to a decision on this matter, Ramonda sends Okoye and Shuri to find the scientist, and once in America, they track down Everett Ross, who reluctantly identifies the creator of the device to be 19-year-old MIT student Riri Williams, who they quickly find and have take them to her lab, which is really just a garage, but as they arrive, US law enforcement surround the building, forcing Okoye and Shuri to escape in separate vehicles, while Riri suits up in her self-made Iron Man suit and flies out of there. Although they manage to escape the police though, they're soon attacked by Talokanil's soldiers, who incapacitate Riri and Shuri before engaging in a fight with Okoye, who holds her own for the most part and even lands what would normally be some fatal blows. but they have nearly no effect on them, and she's ultimately unable to prevent them from taking Riri and Shuri back to Talokan. Upon returning to Wakanda, Okoye is stripped of her position as general of Wakanda's army and her status as Dora Milaje by a furious and distraught Ramonda, who then enters Shuri's lab, hoping that her AI system, Griot, can find her by tracking her Kamoyo beads. But they've since fallen into the possession of Agent Ross, who had fortunately found them before any other officer at the scene of the crime, including his boss and director of the CIA, Valentina Allegra de Fontaine, who, it turns out, is his ex-wife. So, Ramonda next turns to former Wakandan spy and T'Challa's former lover, Nakia, who had left Wakanda following Thanos' attack 6 years ago, struggling to cope with T'Challa suddenly being snapped out of existence. And since then, she's been helping take care of children in a Haiti orphanage. Upon her arrival, Ramonda informs her of what's happened and begs for her help in finding Shuri, to which she ultimately agrees. And we then see Shuri as she awakens in an underwater cave and is brought before Namor, from who she learns of Talokan's origins. He explains that, back in 1571 AD in Zama, Yucatan, his mother and her village were forced to leave their farms by Spanish conquistadors. And facing starvation, war, and disease, the people turned to their god of rain and abundance, Chak, who their shaman believed to have received a vision from, prompting him to enter the ocean, where he found a plant growing from a blue rock that he believed could save his people. So they, including Namor's mother, who was pregnant with him at the time, each ingested the plant, which ended up stripping them of their ability to breathe air and instead allowed them to draw oxygen from the sea, in which they settled, and Namor's mother eventually gave birth to him. But he was born different from the others and describes himself as a mutant, with the plant giving him wings on his ankles, pointed ears, and allowing him to age slower, as well as still breathe air. As the years passed, his mother continued to mourn the life on land that she once knew, and ultimately died of a broken heart. But before her death, she made him promise to bury her in the soil of her homeland. So he prepared to honor that promise, but upon arriving on land, he found many of the village's people being poorly treated as slaves. So he and his Talokanil soldiers attacked the civilization to make room for his mother's burial. And as she was buried, a dying Spanish priest cursed him, calling him El Niño Sin Amor, or the child without love. And from his words, Namor took his name, as he has no love for the surface world. He is very loyal to and protective of his kingdom though, which he then brings Shuri to in a protective suit, making her the first surface dweller to see it. Having caught her up to speed on Talokan, he then reveals their plans of waging war against the surface world, and proposes that Talokan and Wakanda work together in taking them down. But Shuri refuses to take part in starting a world war, so he gives her an ultimatum: either join him and survive the war, or be the first nation to fall. He's then called away and back to the surface by Queen Ramonda, who attempts to bargain for Shuri's return, but he claims they have nothing he wants and threatens their lives if they attempt to search for him or Talokan. While he was on the surface though, Nakia had made her way to their underwater cave, where she finds and aids Shuri and Riri in escaping. Although, in doing so, she's forced to shoot and kill 2 Talokanil, leading Namor, upon his return, to prepare his kingdom for war. And they later fire the first shot by attacking and flooding Wakanda, who prove to be no match as most of their soldiers and people are forced to retreat into the sky, while Ramonda and Riri are met at the palace and subsequently attacked by Namor, who launches multiple water bombs in an attempt to drown the 2 women before returning to the sea. And although he fails in killing Riri, he does succeed in killing Queen Ramonda, who maybe could have survived, but instead made sure Riri did first. Following her death and subsequent memorial, Shuri finally once again attempts to recreate the heart-shaped herb, this time using the fibers from a bracelet Namor had gifted to her, grown from vibranium-rich soil. And it actually works, so she ingests the herb and enters the ancestral plane, although not to be met by the ancestors Ramonda or T'Challa, but Eric Killmonger, who claims they're more alike than she thinks, as they both took the herb for the same reason, to exact revenge. And he believes that, if she wants to save Wakanda, she'll have to take care of business not as her family would have, but as he would. She then awakens, now with the power of the Black Panther, and begins forming a plan of attack to weaken Namor, which she and Riri realize they can do by drying him out, as he likely grows most powerful near water. Shuri then allows Riri to use Wakandan technology to build a new Iron Man suit, before then also recruiting Okoye to their army once again, although this time as a Midnight Angel and with an enhanced suit, one of which they also give to one of Okoye's most loyal warriors, Aneka. Shuri also creates her own Black Panther suit, which she wears into Jabari Land, where the Wakandans have sought refuge, and announces her plans to kill Namor. But M'Baku, aware of the fact that Namor's people see him as a god, believes killing him would risk eternal war, which he believes Ramonda wouldn't have wanted for her daughter. But Shuri no longer cares what her mother would have wanted, claiming her hopes and dreams died with her, and all that matters now is that she wants Namor dead. So they prepare for war in the Atlantic Ocean, not wanting Wakanda to suffer any further damage. And once having lured in him and his army with another vibranium detector, a huge battle ensues, during which Riri is able to knock Namor into a Wakandan aircraft, which begins heating him up and drying him out. And on it, he's soon joined by Shuri, who plans on bringing him out to the desert. So he attempts to break free of the ship, resulting in it imploding and them crash landing on land, where the two engage in a back and forth brawl that nearly comes to an end when a severely weakened Namor impales Shuri through the abdomen with a spear. But she's able to pull herself off the weapon before then setting Namor on fire with a blast from her damaged ship. As she goes to kill him once and for all though, she sees visions of her mother telling her to show him who she is. And so Shuri ultimately chooses to spare his life and offer to protect his kingdom if he yields, so he does. And the two then journey back to the Wakandan ship, whose army by this point has become outnumbered by the Talokanil, and call for them to stop their fighting and return home. Once back in Talokan, Namor is confronted by Namora about his decision to submit to the Wakandans. But he claims their alliance will only prove beneficial, as he believes the rest of the world will eventually turn against and force Wakanda to seek Talokan's help, eventually allowing them to wage war against the surface world. Speaking of the rest of the world, back in the US, Valentina had discovered that Everett Ross had been in communication with Wakanda and had arrested him for treason. But as he's being transported to prison, he's broken out of custody by Okoye in her Midnight Angel suit. Meanwhile in Wakanda, the people prepare a ceremony to officially crown Shuri as queen. But she chooses not to attend, and instead gives up the throne to M'Baku, while she travels to Haiti to take part in a ritual her mother had told her about earlier, that she believed could help her heal from T'Challa's death. And, although she had felt it was unnecessary before, it proves to be impactful now, as she sheds a tear while reliving memories of her lost brother. And she's soon joined in this process by Nakia, as well as her and T'Challa's son, Toussaint, who's introduced to Shuri for the first time, and reveals that Toussaint is his Haitian name, while his real name is T'Challa. On the topic of kids, we're next taken to a flashback with a young Peter Quill decorating a Christmas tree with Kraglin, until they're interrupted by Yondu Yadanta, who's never heard of Christmas. But after having Peter explain it to him, he decides he hates it. Not a fan of the gift giving and its sentimental aspects, and he destroys their tree as a result. This memory, as Kraglin explains to Drax, Mantis, and Nebula, is what he believes ruined the holiday for Peter forever. But Nebula believes it's a good thing they don't partake in the Christmas season, as they now have bigger things to worry about, such as fixing up the recently acquired Nowhere, which had been sold to them by the Collector. And we see Rocket now trying to repair some of the damage Thanos had caused to it years ago with the help of Cosmo the Space Dog's telekinetic powers. Mantis, though, is still hung up on Kraglin's story and believes she should do something to lift Peter's spirits, since, as it turns out, she's his biological sister. A secret she's only told Drax, as she doesn't want to remind Peter of their father Ego's dastardly actions every time he sees her. So Drax comes up with the perfect gift idea, suggesting they give him a man Peter's mentioned countless times over the years, and who they've come to believe is a legendary hero from Earth named Kevin Bacon, who really is just an actor. They're unaware of this fact though, and believe he must be one of the planet's leaders, so they travel to Earth on their new ship, the Bowie, and eventually manage to kidnap Bacon using Mantis's powers. Upon returning to Nowhere, they put together their Christmas surprise for Peter, and it appears to work in raising his holiday spirit. But his joy quickly shifts to concern as Groot wheels in his gift. And upon realizing they've stolen a living person from Earth, he forces Mantis to take him out of her trance and has Kraglin prepare the Bowie for his transport back home. Once back in the Bowie, Kraglin apologizes for his friend's actions, but explains that they were just hoping he could renew Peter's joy for Christmas since they know how much Bacon means to him, with his work being part of what taught Peter how to be a hero. And upon learning this, Bacon decides to head back out into the Christmas party and perform a song with Beezer McTalkalak and his bandmates. Following the performance and Bacon's exit, Peter expresses his disbelief over how they went through all this trouble just for him to Mantis, leading her to explain that they'd heard how Yondu ruined Christmas from Kraglin earlier, so so they wanted to save it for him. But Peter finds this humorous, as that story actually had a happy ending that we see in another flashback, where Yondu, after Peter and Kraglin had thrown away all of their Christmas decorations and gifts, grabbed the gift made for him out of the trash, and was left with a big smile on his face upon opening it. So he decided to give Peter a gift as well, with that gift being Peter's quad blasters that he's continued using in battle since. Mantis, though, says that wasn't the only reason she wanted to do something special for him, and takes this opportunity to finally reveal that she's actually his sister, which Peter claims is the greatest Christmas gift he could have ever gotten, before the two share a touching embrace. We then return to the flashback, where we see Yondu placing Peter's gift on the dashboard of his ship, as Peter sits down beside him, and the phase ends with them flying off into space. And that was our full recap of Phase 4 of the MCU. If you enjoyed the video, then make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And if you want to see more content like this, then click the second link in the description for our Marvel playlist. But once again, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll talk to you again soon.